Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. The headlights on my old Honda brightened so abruptly that I thought a fuse had blown. 1 second, the beam looked normal on the empty stretch of County Road 12, and the next it was twice as bright, washing the gravel and weeds in a harsh white glare. I hadn't touched anything. The switch was in the same position. The dash lights didn't change. Just the headlights. I slowed down, instinctively leaning forward over the wheel like that would help me see something. The road was quiet. No houses for a few miles out there, just farmland, empty pastures, and long gaps of trees that always looked a little too close to the asphalt. It was late, maybe a little after 11. Warm night, no wind, the kind of air that feels too still. I figured it was some electrical glitch. The car had done weird stuff before. My defroster came on once by itself, but something about those headlights felt different. It felt like they weren't just bright. It felt like they were responding to something. I tried switching them off and back on. They stayed bright. A few seconds later, something pale rose up at the end of the road. At first, I thought it was a light on a tractor or maybe someone's porch light, but it was too far from the nearest house and too low to the ground. It wasn't bright exactly, more like a soft white glow, like a lantern behind frosted glass. I rolled to a stop without deciding to. The orb, or whatever it was, hovered maybe a foot off the ground. It didn't sway or flicker. It just sat there at the end of the straightaway, perfectly still. My headlights were aimed right at it. I remember gripping the wheel tighter and realizing I'd stopped breathing. The thing didn't move for a full 5 seconds, maybe more. Hard to tell. Then it rose straight upward. Perfect vertical, no drift. Smooth enough that it didn't look like anything I'd ever seen before. No sound. No vibration. It climbed higher and higher until it got swallowed by the darkness above the tree line. Then it was gone. Just gone. I stayed in the middle of the road for another minute, trying to figure out what I'd seen. My headlights dimmed suddenly, snapping back to normal brightness. That somehow made everything feel worse. I didn't want to keep driving forward toward the spot where the thing had been, so I pulled off to the shoulder and just sat there with the windows down, waiting for my heartbeat to settle. The night felt different. The insects that usually never shut up out there were silent. Even the distant highway hum wasn't there. I kept listening, waiting for some clue, some engine sound, anything that could explain what I saw. Nothing. When I finally drove forward, the road looked totally normal. No scorch marks, no objects, no shadows that looked out of place. Just gravel, grass, and the faint smell of dirt hanging in the humid air. About 2 miles later, I noticed the radio was making a thin buzzing noise, like weak static. The display showed the station name like usual, but no music played. I turned it off, but the buzzing kept going for 10 or 15 seconds before disappearing. Then my phone lit up in the passenger seat. It unlocked itself. The flashlight turned on and off once, like it was glitching. When I picked it up, the screen was warm. Warmer than it should have been for just sitting there. I didn't get any new notifications. I turned the phone off entirely. The rest of the drive was quiet, but not in a normal way. The trees felt closer, like they leaned in over the road more than they had earlier. Every fence post and road sign reflected my headlights too strongly, like they were coated in something brighter than paint. When I got into town, everything looked a little off. The streetlights on Oak Ridge flickered as I passed under each one, not wildly, just a quick dip in brightness like a breath pulled in and let out. My headlights dimmed at the same time, almost in sync, then steadied again. I told myself it was just the electrical grid, old wires, nothing weird. But the timing felt wrong. I pulled into my driveway and just sat in the car with the engine off, watching how still everything looked. My street was usually quiet at night, but this was different. The air felt heavy, like someone was holding the whole block under a glass dome. Right before I got out, I glanced up through the windshield. High above the neighborhood, way past where streetlights could reach, something faint drifted. I don't even know if drifted is the right word. It moved slightly, but not like a plane or a drone. It was too slow, no blinking lights, just a dim patch of pale color, like the sky itself was bruised. It paused, hovered there for a moment, then slid sideways and disappeared behind a thin stretch of cloud. I stood frozen next to my car for a long time, staring up at the sky even after it looked normal again. I kept expecting something else to move, for the light to come back, for my headlights to flare again on their own. Nothing happened. Inside the house, I locked every door. I walked through each room, turning lights on and off, checking if anything flickered or buzzed. Everything worked fine. Everything looked normal, but the silence had changed. It was deeper, like sound didn't travel the same way anymore. When I finally went to bed, I left the curtains open. Part of me wanted to see the sky, but part of me just didn't want to be surprised by anything behind the glass. Sometime around 3 in the morning, I woke up and saw a faint glow on the ceiling. It wasn't bright. It wasn't enough to light the whole room. It was just this subtle, shifting pale reflection, like something outside was moving slowly across the sky. I didn't get up to check. I didn't want to. The glow faded after maybe a minute. When it was gone, the house felt normal again, or as normal as it could feel after what happened. In the morning, everything had that strange clarity it gets after a night of rain, except it hadn't rained. The road was dry, the sky was clear, the air didn't feel humid anymore. On my drive to work, the headlights behaved themselves. The radio worked, the streetlights stayed steady. But every stretch of open sky I passed, I kept looking for that pale glow rising from the ground again, just in case it decided to come back. I was sitting on the porch that night, mostly because the house felt stuffy. It had been one of those warm, late spring evenings where the humidity sticks around even after sunset. The air smelled like wet soil from the storm that had rolled through earlier, but everything had dried fast. Crickets were going non-stop, and the neighbor's dog was doing that low grumbling bark it does when it hears a raccoon. It was around 10, maybe a little after. I'd brought out a folding chair and a glass of water, and I was just scrolling through my phone when something flickered in the corner of my eye. There's a line of trees off to the right side of my yard, 2 big sycamores and 3 smaller maples behind them. Something in that gap between the first 2 sycamores shimmered. I don't know how else to describe it. Not glowing, not moving, just shimmering, like heat rising off pavement, only higher up and much more defined. I blinked and it jumped slightly to the left. Not moved, jumped, like a frame had been skipped. I blinked again and it shifted again, now a little farther back, closer to the darkness beyond the tree line. At first I thought it was my eyes adjusting to the porch light behind me. I rubbed them, looked again, and the shimmer steadied for a second. It floated maybe 6 feet off the ground, barely visible, almost like it was trying not to catch the porch light. I remember leaning forward, trying to figure out if a spider web was catching the light or if it was mist from earlier. But the air wasn't cool enough for mist, and the storm had passed hours before. Plus, it had edges, rounded edges, but still edges. Before I could understand what I was looking at, it snapped out. Not faded, snapped. One blink and it was gone. I sat there longer than I meant to, listening. The crickets had quieted. That's when I realized it wasn't just the dog barking earlier. It was reacting to something. I waited 3 or 4 minutes, eyes fixed on that gap between the trees. Nothing moved. The shimmer didn't come back. The only sound was the occasional drip from the gutter. I told myself it was nothing and picked up my phone again. Not even 20 seconds later, the porch light dimmed. Just a quick dip like the power flickered. When it came back up, the entire backyard looked wrong, flattened somehow, like shadows weren't falling where they should. I stood up out of instinct and stepped to the edge of the porch. The air felt heavy, almost metallic, like the taste of pennies. A soft vibration rolled through the boards under my feet, not shaking, more like a low hum passing through the ground. I looked toward the trees again. The shimmer was back. Only this time it wasn't between the same trees. It was across the yard, near the fence line. Same shape, same faint distortion, like something transparent but dense was standing there. I blinked slowly, testing it, and again it shifted position. Only an inch or two, but enough to notice. My first thought was that someone had stepped into my yard. Someone tall, wearing reflective fabric. But the outline wasn't human. It wasn't any shape I recognized. It was like a droplet of water with sharper angles floating about shoulder height. I took one more step forward. The shimmer pulsed, just once, like a breath. Then it slid sideways without making a sound. Not walked, slid. And then, same as before, it snapped out of existence. The night sounds returned all at once. The crickets, the wind through the branches, something small scurrying in the yard next door. All of it came back in a rush like someone unmuted the world. I should have gone inside. I know that. But something in me needed to check. Not chase it. Just check. I walked down the porch steps slowly, keeping one hand on the railing because the boards felt oddly soft under my feet, like they were vibrating at a frequency I couldn't quite feel but could almost sense. When I stepped into the yard, the air temperature dropped. Not drastically, but enough that goosebumps rose along my arms. I walked toward the first spot where I'd seen the shimmer. Nothing unusual on the ground. No footprints, no broken branches, just damp grass. I turned toward the fence line where the shimmer had reappeared. Everything looked normal. Then, behind me, the porch light dimmed again. I turned fast, half expecting to see something standing on the steps. The light flickered back to full brightness. Nothing moved. I backed toward the steps, suddenly very aware of how quiet the yard was becoming again. The crickets were fading out a second time. Not all at once, but in waves, like something was passing through the air, shutting them up as it went. I made it halfway up the steps when I heard something shift behind the sycamores. Not footsteps, not breaking branches, just a displacement of air, like someone brushing past tall grass. I froze, one foot on the step, and listened. Another vibration rolled under the porch floor. This one was stronger. It felt like a slow wave passing beneath me. I turned and looked over the yard. Nothing. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket 3 times fast, like a notification. When I pulled it out, the screen was blank. No messages, no alerts. But the phone was warm. Warmer than it should have been. I'd had enough. I went inside and locked the door, shutting the blinds and turning the lamp on even though it was late. I sat on the couch for a while listening for anything, but the house stayed quiet. About an hour later, I got up to get a glass of water from the kitchen. The window over the sink faces the backyard, and out of habit, I glanced out. The shimmer was there again. But this time, it was much farther back, beyond the fence, near the tree line of the property behind mine. It hovered between 2 trunks, barely visible unless you stared directly at it. It didn't move. It didn't shift. It just stayed still, a faint distortion in the dark. I stepped closer to the window. It pulsed once, then twice, then snapped out instantly. The backyard looked totally normal again. I didn't stay up after that. I didn't want to see anything else. I locked the window and went to bed, pulling the covers over my head like a kid. I thought maybe I'd dream about it, but I didn't. I slept lightly and woke up feeling weirdly rested but tense, like my body had decided to ignore whatever my brain was doing. In the morning, the yard looked fine. No footprints, no bent grass, no signs anything had been there. The porch light worked. The crickets chirped when I opened the door, but when I walked down the steps, the boards still felt strange, like a faint vibration was lingering deep inside the wood, fading slowly but still there. I haven't seen the shimmer again since that night, but every time I sit on the porch now, I keep my eyes on that gap between the sycamores, just in case it decides to come back. I woke up because something in the house felt wrong. Not a sound, at least not at first. More like a vibration under the mattress, like someone had put a phone on silent mode and shoved it under the bed frame. It was just enough to pull me out of sleep. When I actually opened my eyes, I realized it wasn't the bed vibrating. It was the walls. A low humming, steady and smooth, not mechanical. It wasn't coming from the pipes or the vents. It was inside the drywall somehow, spreading through the room like a held note. I sat there for a few seconds, half awake and confused, trying to figure out if I had left something plugged in. The moment I pushed myself upright, the humming stopped. Not faded, stopped, like someone flipped a switch. I sat completely still, waiting for it to start again. Nothing. The house felt too quiet after that. No refrigerator hum, no furnace sound, not even the faint ticking of the baseboard heater. It was like the place was holding its breath. I got out of bed slowly and went to the window. I live in a small rental house just outside Marquette, up in northern Michigan. My bedroom faces the woods behind the property. Dense trees, no streetlights, nothing but darkness at night, unless the moon is bright. When I pulled the curtains back, the entire sky was glowing white. Not bright white, more like the color of a sheet held over a flashlight. A soft, even glow that had no direction, no source. The trees in the backyard were all silhouettes, sharp and perfectly still. I didn't see any flickering or clouds reflecting city light. It wasn't lightning either. It held steady for maybe 2 seconds. Then it vanished, just pure darkness again, like someone cut the power to the sky. I stood there for a long time, waiting for something else to happen, but everything stayed still. I didn't even hear wind. I ended up staring at my own reflection in the glass, trying to decide if I'd dreamed the whole thing. I checked the clock, 3:08 a.m. My phone said the same. Notifications were normal. Power was on. Everything looked totally ordinary, except for the feeling in my chest, like I was slightly off balance. I went to the kitchen to get water because my mouth felt dry. As soon as I stepped into the hall, the humming started again. Not the same intensity. This time it was softer, more diffused, like the noise was coming through the floor instead of the walls. It vibrated up through my legs and into my ribs, quiet enough that I wondered if I was imagining it, but strong enough to feel. I froze, listening. The sound didn't pulse or shift. It didn't get louder or quieter. It just existed. Constant and even, like an engine idling far underground. Then it cut off, again instantly. I took a few more steps, and it didn't start again. I grabbed a glass of water and stood by the sink. The backyard was completely black through the window. No porch light, no neighbors, no stars. The sky looked unusually empty. When I walked back toward the bedroom, I noticed something I hadn't before. The hallway seemed colder. Not window open cold, but a dry, thin cold that felt unnatural for a house heated by baseboards. Goosebumps rose on my arms, even though the thermostat was set to 69. I put my hand flat against the wall. It was vibrating, very faintly but unmistakable. I pulled my hand back and felt it without touching, just hovering a half-inch away. The air next to the wall felt almost electric. I stepped backward toward the living room. The vibrations stopped. Then, from the bedroom, a soft thump, like someone lightly knocking on the inside of the wall. I nearly dropped the glass. My bedroom light was still off, but the door was open enough that I could see the faint outline of the bed, the dresser. Nothing moved. The sound didn't repeat. I stood there for probably 30 seconds, then forced myself to go back in and check. I turned on the light. Everything was exactly the same. No humming, no vibration, no glowing sky. I got back in bed eventually, but I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling and listened to the house settle like normal. It wasn't until around 4:30 that anything else happened. A soft click, like the sound a lamp makes when turning off, came from the corner of the room where the outlet is. Except the lamp wasn't even plugged in. I had unplugged it 2 days earlier to charge a vacuum. Right after the click, the humming returned. Not loudly. This time it was barely there, like a breath under the floorboards. My pillow seemed to pick it up, vibrating a little under my cheek. I sat up too fast and the humming cut off mid-note. The silence afterward felt even louder. That's when I noticed the trees outside were swaying even though there was no wind. Not a lot, just a subtle rocking motion, like something was pushing air through them. But the leaves weren't rustling. It was as if they were moving without making sound. I watched them for a long time. And then, for maybe a second or two, the sky brightened again. That faint white glow washed everything out. The branches, the yard, the edges of the window frame. My room filled with reflected light even though nothing inside was actually lit. Then it vanished again. I checked the clock, 4:42 a.m. No time jump, nothing strange there. I thought about calling someone, but who do you call for something like that? It wasn't an emergency, and I didn't even know if it was real. Around dawn, I finally fell asleep for a bit, maybe 2 hours. When I woke up, the house felt completely normal. Warmer, noisier, alive in the usual way. Birds were making noise outside. A delivery truck rumbled past on the road. Whatever had happened during the night left no trace. No power fluctuations, no weird marks, no damage. Still, I walked around checking everything just to be sure. Walls felt normal. Floor felt normal. The trees looked fine. It was like nothing had happened. I tried to forget about it, or at least chalk it up to half dreaming, But the thing that keeps sticking with me is this. When I opened my phone that morning, the battery was down to 3%. It had been at 68 when I went to bed. There were no apps open, no background processes, no calls or messages. But when I tapped the battery usage chart, there was a huge unexplained drop right at 3 a.m. The graph just plunged straight down. No reason given. I've been charging it next to my bed for years, and it's never done that before. I haven't heard the humming since, and the sky hasn't glowed again. But sometimes late at night, when the house gets very quiet, I catch myself listening, waiting for that low vibration to start up again behind the walls, just to know whether it was real. I was training for a half marathon that September, which meant a lot of late runs after work. I lived in Tallahassee at the time, renting a duplex near Lake Jackson. The lake trails were usually pretty empty after dark, especially past the first mile. That didn't usually bother me. I liked the quiet, the steady rhythm of running without traffic. That night, I headed out around 9:15. It had been raining most of the afternoon, and the trail was still damp. You could smell wet leaves and mud. The air was warm but not muggy. One of those evenings where the temperature drops just enough to make everything feel still. I started from the parking area near the boat ramp and took the usual loop east along the wooded section. About 10 minutes in, I saw a light ahead of me. It wasn't a flashlight, it wasn't bright enough or shaped right. It was this soft, pale glow floating me maybe 6 or 7 feet above the ground, right in the middle of the trail. It reminded me of the way a bike reflector looks when headlights hit it, except nothing was shining on it. It was just there. At first, I figured it was a runner with some weird reflective vest, or maybe somebody wearing one of those tiny clip-on LEDs, but the light wasn't moving. It just hovered. I slowed down and took out one earbud. The woods were quiet. No bugs, no rustling leaves, nothing. That was strange because the rain usually brought out a ton of insects. I jogged a little closer, maybe 20 feet away, and the light moved. Not fast, just this slow, smooth glide backward down the trail, like it was keeping the same distance from me. I thought maybe it was a drone, but there was no sound. No buzzing, no whirring, just silence, deep silence. I walked for a minute, not sure what I was looking at. The light stayed ahead of me like it was waiting. Whenever I stepped forward, it drifted farther down the path. Whenever I stopped, it held still. I wasn't scared yet, just confused and honestly kind of annoyed. I kept thinking it had to be someone messing with a toy or testing something out. But there weren't any footprints in the mud ahead of me, and the trail was narrow. Anyone running or biking would have left marks. I called out, "Hey, is someone there?" But my voice sounded weird in the quiet, like it didn't go very far. The light didn't react. I tried jogging again, picking up the pace. The light stayed the same distance ahead, gliding smooth as a cable cam. No sway, no bounce. It felt wrong, the way it moved, too steady, too straight. Around the next bend, the trees got thicker, and the trail dipped slightly with a wooden footbridge over a runoff creek. The light moved onto the bridge and stopped right in the middle of it. I slowed down again. The air felt heavier there, like the humidity suddenly doubled. I could feel sweat cooling on my arms even though I hadn't run hard enough to justify it. I walked onto the bridge carefully. The boards creaked normally under my shoes. The light was about 10 feet in front of me. As I got closer, maybe 8 feet away, the glow dimmed in this weird, pulsing way. Not like fading out, more like something passing in front of it. I couldn't see a shape, though, just that the light flickered, then steadied again. I remember thinking how quiet the creek was. Usually even a tiny trickle of water made noise under that bridge, but I couldn't hear anything. No frogs, no wind, no distant road sounds. Nothing at all. I stepped forward one more time. The light blinked out, not faded, vanished, like somebody turned off a switch. The darkness hit hard. My eyes hadn't adjusted because I'd been staring at that glow, so the trail went pitch black. I stood there, breathing too fast, waiting for my vision to come back. Even the air felt different, lighter, emptier. Then the forest sounds returned all at once. Crickets, distant tree frogs, a night bird calling, everything layered together like someone had unmuted the world. I didn't move for a minute. I just stood on the bridge and listened. The bugs were almost too loud after all that silence. Eventually, I jogged the rest of the loop, but way slower than usual. I kept checking behind me even though I didn't see anything else strange. The woods looked normal. The trail looked normal. If I hadn't seen the mud on my shoes later, I would have wondered if I had even been out there at all. When I got back to the parking lot, I realized the run tracking app on my phone had stopped at 9:32. The screen wasn't frozen, it just showed a perfectly clean end to the route, as if I had tapped finish myself. That was around the time I'd first noticed the hovering light. It didn't record the rest of the run. I tried replaying it, but the app said the run was complete. The GPS graph looked fine up until the moment the light showed up. Then nothing. On the drive home, I kept checking the woods on either side of the road. The trees looked normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there with me on the trail. Not watching, exactly, but aware. I told my friend Marcus about it the next day. He runs that trail sometimes too. He laughed it off and said I'd probably seen someone's drone. Maybe he was right, but I know what drones sound like, and I know they don't move like that. I didn't run the lake loop again for a week. When I finally went back, the trail felt totally different. Brighter, noisier, alive. There was nothing weird at all. Still, every time I reached that wooden bridge, I slowed down without meaning to. I listened for the silence. I watched for that pale glow hovering just ahead of me. It hasn't happened again, but I keep expecting it to. I was camping alone near the Red River Gorge in Kentucky, a few miles off one of the less traveled trails. It was late October, that weird time when the air gets cold the moment the sun drops, even if the day was warm. I'd set up my small tent in a clearing just wide enough for it, with the tree line tightening around me on all sides. I'd been there once before with friends, but this was the first time I'd camped it solo. I'd already finished dinner, just a freeze-dried pasta bag and some instant coffee, and was sitting on a log by the fire. There wasn't much sound except the crackling and the occasional creak of branches shifting overhead. It wasn't windy, but every now and then you could hear the woods adjusting, like the cold made everything settle differently. I remember poking at the fire, trying to get the last bit of flame to catch on a stubborn piece of wood. That's when the ground trembled. It was one quick jolt, not enough to knock anything over, not even enough to be alarming on its own. Just a single, soft, almost polite shake, like someone big had stepped on the earth nearby. The log under me vibrated. My mug rattled a little. Even the fire seemed to shift, as if something underneath had moved. I sat still for a second, listening. There wasn't any aftershock, no rumbling, just one gentle tremor and then nothing. I figured it must have been distant blasting or something. There were rock climbers, old quarries, random construction miles away. I tried to brush it off, but the woods went dead quiet afterward. I don't mean quieter. I mean everything stopped. No bugs, no faint rustling, no night birds. Just total air-sucking silence. Even the fire sounded muffled somehow. I remember holding my breath without meaning to. I stood up and looked around, half expecting to see an animal or something moving through the trees, but the tree line looked normal, just dark silhouettes against the sky. A few seconds passed, maybe 10. Then something above the clouds lit up. It wasn't lightning. I've camped through storms plenty of times. This was slower, like a glow being turned up behind a lampshade. The clouds overhead brightened with this dull metallic color, not white, not blue, not quite silver, just a weird industrial-looking glow. It pulsed once. Just one slow, deep pulse of light that filled the whole sky above me, almost like it was breathing. Then it faded back into the dark. I just stood there staring up, waiting for another flash or a sound. But there was nothing, not even a distant plane or a gust of wind. The woods stayed dead silent, like the whole place was holding its breath. After maybe 30 seconds, I heard the bugs again, starting all at once, like someone flipped a switch. The woods felt normal again. The fire crackled normally. My shoulders unknotted a bit, but the back of my neck didn't. That stayed tight. I tried to keep camping like nothing happened. I added a couple pieces of wood to the fire and pretended to focus on boiling water for some tea, but my ears were tuned to the sky in this wired, instinctive way. Every tiny sound made me look up. I kept checking the clouds through this small gap in the trees over my tent. I thought about texting my friend Kyle, but I had no cell signal at all. not even the one bar I'd had earlier in the evening. Eventually, around 10:30, I crawled into my tent. I wasn't really tired, but I wanted to be inside something with walls, even flimsy ones. I zipped the entrance shut and lay on my sleeping bag, listening. At first, it was normal. Crickets, a few distant owls, leaves settling. Then the silence came back, exactly like before. One moment the forest was alive, and the next, it was like someone muted everything. The absence of sound felt heavier than the presence of it. I sat up slowly. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I waited, but nothing else happened. No tremor, no glow, just silence thick enough to make you feel like you weren't alone. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and stepped outside. The air was freezing now, but I barely noticed. I looked up through the same gap in the trees. Nothing, just dark clouds barely visible against the darker sky. I turned slowly, checking the tree line. My flashlight beam caught nothing but trunks and leaves. No movement, no shine, no eyes reflecting back. Then a faint breeze hit me. Just a small one, brushing the tops of the trees and stirring the leaves at my feet. The forest noises kicked back in a second later, sudden and full, like I'd stepped into a room where a conversation was already happening. I stayed outside for a long time after that, just listening and watching the sky. Nothing else happened, but my nerves stayed stretched tight. I finally crawled back into the tent and slept in short bursts, waking every time the woods went too quiet. When I packed up the next morning, I noticed something I hadn't seen the night before. Around the clearing, on the ground, the leaves, even a few logs, there was this very fine, pale dust. Not ash, not pollen, almost like metal shavings ground so small they looked like powder. It wasn't thick, but it was noticeable. It brushed off my boots in smooth streaks. Nothing above the clearing looked burned or damaged. The trees weren't marked, the ground wasn't scorched. It was just that faint dust, like it had drifted down overnight. I left earlier than I planned. On the hike back to my car, the normal forest sounds felt almost too normal, like they were compensating for the quiet from the night before. I didn't tell anyone about it for weeks. When I finally did mention the glowing sky to Kyle, he joked about satellites and weather balloons. I agreed with him out loud, because that was easier than describing how wrong the silence had felt, or how the light had pulsed like something alive behind the clouds. I've been back to Red River Gorge a few times since, but I won't camp alone there anymore. I stick to the popular sites where you can always hear at least one other person breathing or moving around their tent. The woods are beautiful, but I don't trust the quiet there anymore. I was driving back from visiting my sister in La Push, taking that narrow 2-lane road that winds along the coast. It was close to midnight, fog rolling in so thick it felt like the ocean was quietly climbing up onto the land. I wasn't tired exactly, but it was the kind of drive where you start paying attention to every little noise in the car because there's nothing else to focus on. My GPS was mounted on the dash, glowing this soft blue. I remember checking it every few minutes just to reassure myself I hadn't missed a turn. Service out there drops in and out whenever it feels like it, so the map sometimes froze for a second before catching up. I was maybe 20 minutes south of Rialto Beach when the GPS froze again. I didn't think much of it until it updated, not to the road, but to open water. The icon for my car was sitting about half a mile offshore, like I was driving straight across the Pacific. I stared at it for a second, confused, thinking maybe it glitched and grabbed some old cached map. But the screen wasn't frozen anymore. The little arrow, that tiny blue triangle, was drifting farther out, inch by inch, as if the car was still in motion. I tapped the screen. Nothing. I closed the map and reopened it. Same thing. My car symbol was floating in the ocean, still creeping forward like it was following some invisible road under the waves. I slowed down, more out of instinct than anything else. The fog swallowed the headlights, making everything outside look like blank white paper. The only real sense of direction I had was the faint yellow line down the middle of the road. Then the GPS snapped back to normal. One blink, it was in the ocean. The next blink, it was right back on the winding stretch of Highway 110, exactly where I actually was. No lag, no buffering, just instantaneous correction. The map rotated sharply to realign itself, like it was embarrassed it had gotten lost. But when it corrected, something else happened. A faint, pale light appeared in the reflection across my windshield. I didn't see it in the sky directly, just in the glass, the way you sometimes catch a glimpse of a passing car's headlights behind you. Except there weren't any cars behind me. The road had been empty for at least 15 minutes. The light wasn't bright. It had this thin, washed-out color to it, almost like a flashlight beam filtered through milk. I looked up past the windshield to see it for real, but there was nothing there, just fog and the vague dark shape of the treetops on my left. When I looked back at the windshield reflection, the light was still there, very faint, steady, like it was hovering somewhere above the car but only visible as a reflection. My heart thudded harder than it needed to. I kept driving, slower now, maybe 30 miles an hour. The reflection didn't move much, just drifted slightly side to side in this way that didn't match the motion of my car. After maybe 10 seconds, it faded out. Not like it sped away, just like someone turned down the dimmer switch until it was gone. I stared at the sky for a long time after that, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. The fog made everything above me look flat and low, like a ceiling I could almost touch, but I didn't see any lights or shapes breaking through it. I kept going. I tried the radio, but it was nothing but static. Not even the faint kind where you can sometimes hear a distant station bleeding through. Just thick, empty static. About 5 minutes later, I heard a soft tapping. Not on the window, on the roof. It was gentle, almost uneven, like someone running their fingers along the top of the car. I turned off the radio to listen better, even though it was already static. Tap, tap, pause. Then 2 more taps faster together. I pulled over without thinking. My hands were sweating, and I could feel my pulse in my neck. I rolled the window down and stuck my head out. Nothing. No branches overhead, no cliffs, no loose pieces on the roof that might have been flapping. The fog pressed in thicker without the forward motion of the car. The air felt damp and heavy, like I'd stepped into a steam room. I kept listening for whatever had tapped, but the woods were dead quiet. Even the ocean, which I knew was somewhere to my right, sounded distant and faint. I decided to get out and check the roof. I opened the door slowly. The dome light flicked on, and the fog around me lit up like I was inside a glowing bubble. I reached up and ran my hand across the top of the car. It was warm. Not hot, not anything extreme, just warm in a way that didn't fit the night around me. The hood and the sides of the car were cold like normal metal would be at midnight in coastal fog. Only the roof had this lingering heat to it, almost like it had been under a lamp. I stood there for a second with my hand pressed against the metal, trying to decide if the warmth meant anything or if I was just worked up, but it didn't feel like I was imagining it. It was too distinct. Then I heard something up the road, a soft whooshing sound, like a strong gust of wind moving through leaves. Except the trees weren't moving. Their branches stayed completely still, silhouetted against the fog. The whooshing passed overhead, not around me. A brief swell of sound, maybe 2 seconds long. I didn't see anything, but the fog shifted, just barely, like something large had displaced the air above me. I got back in the car fast and locked the doors without meaning to. My breathing felt tight in my chest, controlled but shallow, and enough like I was trying not to make a sound. When I pulled back onto the road, my headlights flickered twice. They didn't go out, just dimmed and brightened again quickly, almost like they were reacting to something external rather than an electrical issue. I drove the rest of the way, barely blinking. The GPS didn't glitch again. The tapping didn't return. But the radio stayed static until I hit the outskirts of Forks, where it suddenly snapped back to a normal station mid-song. I got home around 1 a.m. and sat in my driveway for a solid minute before getting out. The roof of the car was cool by then. The next morning, I checked the GPS history. The entire stretch where it showed me drifting out to sea wasn't recorded. It jumped from one normal point on the road to the next, like the ocean detour never happened. I'm not a tech person, so maybe it was a software bug. Maybe the light on the windshield was just some weird reflection. Maybe the warmth was from the engine somehow, even though that didn't make sense physically. But sometimes, when I think about the way the fog shifted overhead, like something big and quiet moved just above me, I get that same tight feeling in my chest, and I still don't trust my GPS anywhere near the coast. My dog, Luna, stopped so suddenly that the leash jerked tight in my hand. I thought she'd spotted a raccoon or heard another dog, but when I looked down, she wasn't pulling toward anything. She wasn't even sniffing. She just froze, rigid, ears up, tail straight, staring straight above us. We were on Miller Road, a quiet residential street on the edge of town. It was close to 10 p.m., one of those warm, overcast summer nights where everything feels a little dull and muted. Most houses were dark, except for a porch light here and there. I had earbuds in, a podcast playing low enough that I still caught the small noises around me. But when Luna stopped, I pulled one earbud out to see what she'd heard. There was nothing, just the faint hum of distant traffic and the soft clinking of her collar when she shifted a little. Then she whimpered. Not scared exactly, more like uncertain. She tilted her head up so far I thought she'd flip backwards. I followed her gaze. The clouds were thin enough that the moon showed through as this big, pale disk, not bright, just washed out. And right across the front of it, cutting a clean, smooth line, something drifted. My first thought was, cloud, obviously, but the shape didn't match. Clouds ripple and change and drag their edges behind them. This thing had a sharp outline. Hard to tell how big it was, but it felt close. Closer than a plane, much lower than a drone. No blinking lights, no sound. It floated in a straight, steady path, almost like it was gliding on rails. It moved slowly enough that I had time to process it. It wasn't a bird either. It didn't flap or shift. It didn't even sway. Just a smooth, dark oval sliding across the moon. I stood there staring until it slipped behind a thicker patch of cloud and disappeared. The whole thing lasted maybe 5 seconds. Luna's tail tucked between her legs, and she kept staring up even after it was gone. I waited another minute or so before tugging her along. She didn't resist, but she kept glancing over her shoulder, ears twitching. We kept walking, and I tried to convince myself I'd misinterpreted it. Maybe a low plane with weird lighting or some trick of the clouds. But every time I replayed it in my head, the movement didn't fit anything normal. We reached the corner where the street meets a small patch of woods. Not a real forest, just a strip of land between subdivisions, but dark enough to feel isolated. Luna slowed again. She sniffed the air, then leaned closer to the tree line, pulling hard on the leash. I didn't want to get too close, so I held her back. That's when I heard a noise. Not from the woods, from above. It sounded like a faint vibration. Not loud, but deep, like the hum you feel rather than hear. I checked my phone in case it was vibrating in my pocket, but the screen was dark. I held my breath, and the hum continued, steady but soft, like a distant generator in the sky. Luna pressed against my leg and whined. The hum rose slightly in pitch, then dropped back down. Not a siren, not a plane engine. It had no rhythm to it, more like air being pushed in a strange way. I couldn't see anything through the clouds, just that gray-white ceiling above the streetlights. But I kept catching small movements out of the corner of my eye, shifts in the cloud cover that didn't match the direction of the breeze. I told myself it was just paranoia, the mind filling in gaps. But then one of the streetlights flickered. Not a full power dip, just a single twitch of brightness, like something passed between it and the ground. Another light flickered farther down the road. I turned back the way we'd come. Something about the air felt a little warmer, like the temperature had risen by a few degrees without any wind or movement. Luna was practically glued to my leg now, tail still tucked. I started walking faster, not running, just trying not to look like I was hurrying. Luna matched my pace, trotting close, eyes darting upward every few seconds. I couldn't help doing the same. When we were about 3 houses from mine, the hum cut off completely. Not faded, cut off, like someone unplugged it. The sudden silence made my ears ring. For a moment, I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing, but Luna stopped again and stared back toward the trees. The clouds shifted, and for a split second, I saw something glow faintly through them. A soft, white-blue blur. Not round like the moon, more like an elongated stripe of light. It pulsed once, very faintly, then dissolved back into the cloud cover. I couldn't tell how far away it was. Something about the brightness made it impossible to judge distance. It could have been huge and far, or small and close. It didn't cast light on the ground, didn't light the sky around it. It just existed inside the clouds for that one moment. I yanked on the leash a little too abruptly, and Luna flinched. I apologized under my breath and sped up again. My house came into view at the end of the block, porch light glowing yellow. I don't think I'd ever been relieved to see that boring little bulb before. As we reached the driveway, Luna let out a short bark, one sharp sound, then went silent. She looked up one last time. I followed her gaze. Nothing, just clouds drifting, the faintest hint of moon behind them. We stepped inside, and I closed the door faster than I meant to. I locked it, which I never do at that hour when I'm just taking her out for a quick loop. Luna went straight to her water bowl, but she kept pausing between sips to glance toward the window. Normally, after a walk that late, she'd curl up in her bed. Instead, she sat by my feet, alert, listening for something. I kept checking the windows like I was expecting another light to show up. It didn't. But when I took Luna out the next morning, she hesitated on the porch. She stared at the sky for a long moment before stepping off the last stair, and I did the same. I woke up because something in the house felt wrong. Not loud, nothing crashing or banging, just off. It took me a second to figure out what it was. The air in my living room was vibrating. Not shaking exactly, but kind of shivering, like there were huge engines running miles away and the rumble was finding its way into the walls. I lay there listening, not sure if I was dreaming or if it was one of those half-awake sensations where your body gets confused. But the vibration didn't fade. It wasn't physical enough to rattle anything. No frames, no shelves. But I felt it in my chest, in my teeth, in that weird low part of my throat, like when you stand too close to a bass speaker. My apartment isn't big. 1 bedroom, living room, kitchenette, all on the second floor of a small building. So when something feels off in one room, you feel it everywhere. The vibration didn't seem to come from any direction. It just existed in the air. I glanced at my phone. 2:47 a.m. The vibration got a tiny bit stronger, just enough that I sat up in bed. My first instinct was some kind of machinery outside, maybe road work or a generator turning on somewhere, but I didn't hear anything through the walls. No trucks, no engines, nothing. I tossed the blanket off and swung my legs over the side of the bed. As soon as my feet touched the carpet, I felt the vibration through the floor too. Not shaking, not moving, just a steady low pulse. I stepped into the hallway. It felt stronger there, like walking into a warm draft, except it wasn't warm. The air felt thicker, harder to breathe, like the pressure shifted slightly. Halfway to the living room, the vibration stopped. Not faded. Stopped. Abruptly, like somebody flipped a switch. I froze where I was, one hand on the wall. My ears rang in the sudden silence. The air felt empty in a way that made the hair on my arms lift. For a few seconds, I didn't move, just stood there listening. Nothing. When I reached the living room, everything was normal. The couch, the lamp, the glass of water I'd left on the coffee table. But something about the room felt unsettled, like I'd walked in right after someone else had walked out. I walked over to the big window facing the parking lot and pulled the blinds up a few inches. The lot was empty except for a few cars. A street lamp flickered once and then stayed steady. There was no wind, no insects, no distant hum of the highway, just silence. I checked the time on the microwave clock, 2:52. My phone had said 2:47 only a moment earlier. I stared at those glowing green numbers for way too long. 5 minutes disappearing isn't a lot, but the jump felt wrong, especially because I didn't remember the walk to the living room taking more than 30 seconds. I pulled my phone back out. The lock screen still said 2:52. No notifications, no glitches, no alarms that might have confused me. I toggled the screen off and back on, still 2:52. I didn't know what to do with myself, so I grabbed a hoodie from the back of the chair and walked in the kitchen. The floor felt normal, no vibration, no pressure. I drank water from the glass on the counter and just stood there with both hands wrapped around it. A moment later, something tapped. Not the door, not the window. Somewhere in the apartment, a soft, quick tap like someone lightly flicking the wall with their finger. I turned toward the hallway. Nothing moved, nothing shifted. I held my breath and waited. Another tap, a little lower this time, maybe closer to the floor. I crouched down, pressing my palm to the carpet. No vibration, no sound, just the tap, like someone testing different parts of the wall. My first thought was pipes, old building, weird plumbing, maybe someone downstairs turned something on. But the taps weren't rhythmic. They didn't match each other in timing or direction. They felt inquisitive, if that makes sense, like something checking the boundaries of the space. After a few seconds, they stopped too. Just stopped. I stood up slowly. The living room looked normal, but the air felt alert, like the room was holding its breath with me. I went back to the window and pushed the blinds a little higher. The parking lot looked the same, but the street lamp at the far end flickered again. 3 slow flickers, then steady. Something about the pattern felt intentional. I backed away from the window. Not panicking, but not comfortable either. My brain kept trying to make a rational list of explanations. Power surge, electrical noise, construction somewhere, faulty wiring. But none of those would make the air vibrate like that. And none of them explained the 5-minute jump. I sat on the couch, hoodie zipped tight, even though the room wasn't cold. Luna, the dog I sometimes walk for my neighbor, scratched on the wall next door. It startled me so badly I almost jumped off the couch. I forced myself to breathe normally. I checked my phone again. 2:57. Time was moving normally now. I turned the TV on low just to get some sound in the room. I didn't even watch it. I just wanted the noise. Every few minutes I'd get up and look out the window again. Around 3:20, something flickered in the corner of my vision. I jerked my head up. It wasn't the street lamp this time. The clouds above the building briefly lit up, soft, dim, like someone shining a flashlight through thick fog. The glow lasted maybe half a second, not bright enough to light the ground, just a faint bloom in one section of the sky. Then it was gone. The vibration didn't return, but the silence afterward felt the same. That expectant quiet, like the night was waiting for something. I stayed on the couch until sunrise, watching the sky go from black to gray to pink. Nothing else happened. No more taps, no strange lights, no missed time. I eventually lay back down around 7 and slept for a couple hours. When I checked the clocks later, everything lined up. My phone, the microwave, the oven. None of them had changed. Just that one 5-minute jump in the middle of the night. I didn't tell anyone at first. What do you even say? Hey, my apartment felt like it was humming, the sky flashed, and time decided to skip ahead like a bad video? It didn't sound real even in my own head. But in the days afterward, little things kept nudging at my memory. The sound, or lack of sound, right after the vibration stopped, the pressure in the air, the exact moment my phone's time jumped, down to the second, and the way the sky glowed that faint, impossible color. I still take the blinds down at night sometimes, just to see if the street lamp flickers again. It hasn't, not once, but about a week later, lying in bed, I felt a tiny tremor in the air. So small, I would have missed it if I wasn't waiting for it. I sat up immediately, checked the clock. This time, nothing changed, but the room stayed quiet for a long, long time. I noticed it while letting my dog out behind the duplex. It was late, close to midnight, and the sky was clear enough that you could see every star. This was in Ridge Park, Colorado, where light pollution is low enough that the sky actually looks like a sky and not a faded ceiling. I wasn't even really paying attention at first. I was standing in the cold waiting for Hazel to sniff the same patch of grass she sniffed every night. Then I looked up, and there it was. A blurry spot in the sky. At first, I thought it was my eyes. I blinked hard, rubbed them a little, but the blur didn't change. Everything else, stars, the line of the roof, the silhouette of the mountains, was sharp. But one small patch, about the size of my fist held up at arm's length, looked out of focus, like someone had smudged a lens. I stared at it for maybe 10 seconds before it moved. Not fast. It drifted. Slow enough that I questioned whether it was drifting at all, like maybe my depth perception was off. But no, after a few seconds, it was obviously shifting across the stars, the way a cloud might move if it was way up in the stratosphere and incredibly thin. Except there were no clouds. The air was freezing and totally clear. Hazel growled once, a low, uncertain sound. She doesn't growl at the sky. At raccoons, sure. At the neighbor's cat, definitely. But not at empty air. She backed up toward the door. I kept watching the blur. My brain kept trying to interpret it as something normal, maybe a patch of wind distortion, maybe a tiny cloud I just couldn't see the edges of. but didn't behave like anything I'd seen. It didn't expand or thin out. It didn't shift shape. It just drifted, maintaining this weird fuzzy oval like an out-of-focus asteroid was passing overhead. When it reached a thin strip of cloud near the horizon, I swear this happened, it disappeared behind it, like it had depth, like it was actually above the cloud. I waited for it to come out the other side. It didn't. Hazel scratched at the back door, clearly done with whatever was happening. I opened it for her, stepped inside, and immediately felt stupid for how fast I locked it. But something about that blur had wedged under my skin. I couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't been a trick of the eyes. I tried to go to bed, but the more I thought about it, the less I liked sitting in a dark room with the blinds open, so I closed them. Then I opened them again. I didn't want to feel like I was hiding from something. Eventually, I just lay there with my phone on my chest, scrolling nothing. Around 1:20 a.m., I heard a soft popping sound, like static from a radio just before it tunes in. It wasn't in the house. It came from outside, maybe down the street. Hazel lifted her head from where she was curled at the foot of the bed. Her ears went straight up. Another pop, slightly louder. Then silence. I got up and looked out the blinds. The street was empty, just the orange glow of the sodium lamp at the corner, the shadow of the neighbor's pickup, the fence line. No movement, no people, nothing. I almost closed the blinds again when I saw something shift near the far end of the street. Not a person, not an animal, just a faint distortion in the air, like heat rising off asphalt. Except it was below freezing, and this heat ripple was moving horizontally across the road. The air behind it shimmered slightly, like looking through warped glass. It drifted past the street lamp, and for an instant the light above it flickered. Not a normal flicker either. It dimmed smoothly, almost like a dimmer switch being turned down. Then the distortion passed, and the lamp returned to normal. I held perfectly still, fingers tight on the blinds. The distortion kept moving, slow and steady, until it faded into the darkness near the cul-de-sac. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I went outside early just to prove to myself the world was normal again. The sky was clear blue, no blur, no distortion. Hazel trotted around the yard like she'd forgotten everything. But as I was heading back inside, I noticed the fence. 5 of the boards near the far side had a faint powdery residue on them, like someone rubbed chalk across the wood. When I touched it, it felt cold. Too cold for sunlight to have warmed the board, but colder than the rest of the fence. My fingers tingled numbly for a moment after brushing it. I told myself it was frost, even though it didn't look like frost. That evening, I drove to the grocery store, partly because I needed things, mostly because I didn't want to sit alone in the house again. The store was bright, noisy, normal. I lingered in aisles I didn't need anything from. On the drive home, just after I turned onto Ridge Park Road, the radio cut out for half a second. Not off, not static, just silence. And then came back. I frowned and tapped the console. The same thing happened again a few seconds later. Then I saw something in the rearview mirror. A shimmer. A small patch of air behind my car, slightly warped like a reflection off water. It hovered maybe 20 feet off the ground and drifted across the tops of the trees lining the road. Compared to the trees, I could tell it was actually moving, keeping pace with me for a few seconds before veering off. My stomach dropped. I slowed down, pulled onto the shoulder, and turned around in my seat. The shimmering patch slid between branches, then rose upward, higher and higher until it merged with the sky. Gone. I sat there gripping the wheel, trying to convince myself it was just some weird light trick. Maybe headlights from another car hitting ice crystals in the air. Except there were no other cars, and no ice crystals. And the radio cutting out right before hadn't felt like coincidence. Back home, I didn't turn on any lights for a while. I kept the living room dim and sat on the couch with Hazel's head on my knee. Every few minutes I'd glance at the window, half expecting to see that blurry patch floating there. Nothing happened for hours. Then, just after midnight, Hazel stood up abruptly and walked to the back door. Not whining, not scratching, just staring at it with her tail stiff. I joined her, but I didn't open it. Through the glass, I couldn't see anything. The yard was silent, but the air outside felt still, too still, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. Then one star above the yard flickered. Not twinkled, flickered. like a candle flame. Once, twice. Then the star dimmed slightly and stayed dim as if something had moved in front of it. I waited, not moving, barely breathing. Slowly, that dim section of sky, just a tiny dark patch, shifted to the left. A smooth, steady motion. It passed between two brighter stars and then faded, blending back into the night like it had never been separate from it. Hazel backed away from the door. I locked it again, even though I knew that wouldn't mean anything to something that could pass through the sky like that. I didn't sleep that night either. When dawn came, the world looked normal again. Cars starting, neighbors walking their dogs, distant traffic hum. But it didn't feel normal. I still look up every night, checking the sky the way you check a bruise to see if it's still tender. Most nights, there's nothing. But a few nights ago, a patch of stars near the tree line dimmed all at once, like someone touched the sky and smudged it. And for a moment I thought I saw something drifting just behind that smudge, as if the sky itself was hiding whatever was moving through it. The water was so still that morning it looked more like glass than a lake. I remember that clearly. It was early, around 5, one of those September mornings where the cold sits right on your skin, but the air smells clean enough that you don't mind. I'd driven out to Cedar Basin to fish before work, something I didn't get to do often anymore. I parked near the south shore, hiked down the slope, and set up near a cluster of reeds where the trout usually bit. There was a faint mist on the surface, drifting in patches. The sun wasn't up yet, but the sky had that dim bluish color that hinted morning wasn't far off. The only sound was the occasional plunk of my lure hitting the water and the soft rustle of the reeds. I was alone, at least as far as I knew. I just cast out again, letting the line settle when I noticed something beneath the surface. At first, it was just a tiny point of brightness, like someone had dropped a waterproof flashlight way down in the lake. I assumed it was a reflection, maybe from a star still hanging on above the horizon, but traveled and it moved. It traveled in a perfectly cutting under the water and it cut no ripple with rill, no disturbance, just this sharp white point slipping through the dark, too fast to be a swimmer, too steady to be a fish. And definitely not a boat. Boats don't glide underwater. I stood up, squinting, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. But the point kept going, and as it got closer to the shore, I realized it wasn't just light reflecting off something. It was its own light, bright enough that it glowed through the water like a spark. Then it stopped, dead stop, as if it hit an invisible wall beneath the lake. The hairs on my arms lifted. The whole air felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike, even though the sky was clear. Before I could make sense of it, the light jerked upward, not rising like a bubble or a fish surfacing, shooting, a straight vertical line, fast enough that I barely saw it cross the surface. There was no splash, no ripple, nothing that made physical sense. One moment the light was under the water, the next it was in the air, leaving a faint streak behind it like a camera exposure. It climbed so high, so fast that by the time I'd blinked, it was already above the tree line. Then it just vanished into the sky, swallowed by the dim blue above me. I stood there for a long time, rod dangling in my hand, waiting for something to follow. Sound, wind, anything. The lake stayed perfectly calm. I reeled in my line and tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was some kind of drone underwater? But drones don't move like that, and they don't shoot out of the water silently. And who would be flying one in the dark at 5 in the morning in the middle of Cedar Basin? I was still staring at the lake when something else felt off. The mist that had been drifting across the water earlier had frozen in place. Not literally frozen. It wasn't solid. But it wasn't moving. It just hovered there, like time had paused for it. The air was still, yet the mist stayed in these perfect, unmoving shapes. Then, slowly, it began to drift again, as if whatever had disturbed it was gone. I packed up sooner than I planned. I wasn't scared exactly, just unsettled. I kept glancing over my shoulder on the hike back up the slope, expecting to see another light move under the surface or something watching from the trees. When I got to my truck, the radio flickered. Not on and off, just a tiny hiccup in the static of the unused channel I normally kept it on during the early mornings. A half-second skip, enough that I noticed. Then, as I pulled out onto the dirt road, the truck's dashboard lights dimmed. Only for a second. just long enough to make me take my foot off the gas. I drove home without turning on the radio again. For the rest of the day, everything felt slightly off kilter. At work, my coworker Sam asked if I was sick. I told him I was fine, just tired. I didn't bring up the light. I couldn't picture how to explain it without sounding like I'd lost it. The next morning, I went back to Cedar Basin. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted proof I hadn't imagined it. Maybe I thought the lake would look normal in daylight and I'd be able to laugh it off. But the moment I got out of the truck, something felt wrong. Birds usually chirped around there at sunrise, jays, sparrows, the occasional hawk. That morning, nothing. Total silence. The kind that feels heavy, like sound is being swallowed. I walked down to the water and stopped abruptly when I saw the reeds. The tops of them were pressed flat, not like they'd been bent by wind, but pushed straight down, like something had hovered just above them. A perfect circle, maybe 4 feet across. I crouched down and touched the flattened tops. They were cold, much colder than the surrounding vegetation. The lake itself looked normal. No glow, no ripples, nothing unusual, but when I tossed a small stone toward the surface to test the water, it hit with barely any splash, just a tiny plip and then silence. The sound felt muted, as if the air itself was dampening it. I didn't stay long. That night, around 3 in the morning, Hazel, my dog, started whining. She paced near the back door, ears pointed backward, tail down. When I stepped outside with her, the air felt thick, not humid, just heavy, like walking into a room with pressure built up. I looked up at the sky on instinct. There was a faint glow overhead. Not bright, not like a beam or anything dramatic, just a soft white patch drifting between the stars. Warmer in color than the moon, cooler than a streetlight. It moved slowly across the sky, in the same direction the light in the lake had shot. My breath fogged in front of me, even though the night wasn't cold enough for that. Hazel pressed against my leg, trembling. The glow faded as it crossed behind a cloud. I waited for it to come out on the other side. It didn't. The cloud itself dimmed, like the glow was still behind it, but when the cloud drifted away, the sky was empty. I stayed outside until Hazel tugged me back toward the house. A few nights later, I woke up without knowing why. No sound, no dream, nothing obvious, just that feeling of suddenly being awake. I glanced at the clock, 3:42 a.m. Out of habit, I looked toward the window. For the briefest moment, less than a second, I saw a faint white reflection flicker across the glass, as if something bright had moved outside. When I sat up to look, the yard was dark, totally still. I checked the clock again, 3:45 a.m. 3 minutes gone. Not a long time, but long enough that I knew I hadn't looked away or fallen asleep again. It was just missing. I still fish at Cedar Basin sometimes, but never before sunrise. I can't bring myself to sit alone by that water in the dark, waiting for something to move beneath it. And every once in a while, usually on clear nights, I'll see a faint patch of sky drift. Not a cloud, not a spotlight. Just a soft blur sliding between the stars. Always moving in the same direction. The blackout hit right after dinner. 1 second the lights were on, the next the entire block went dark. No flicker, no warning, just everything shutting off at once. I'd been sitting on my couch scrolling through my phone, but even that died a second later. Not powered down, just black screen like the battery had vanished. It was a hot August night, humid enough that the walls felt sticky, so staying inside without AC wasn't an option. I stepped out onto the porch to get some air. A few of my neighbors were already outside too, standing around looking confused. I remember seeing Mr. Alvarez from across the street lighting a candle on his steps while his wife kept tapping her phone like that would fix it. The whole neighborhood felt wrong without the usual hum of electricity. No porch lights, no TV noise bleeding through windows, no cars passing, just a heavy, unnatural quiet. Even the cicadas, which had been obnoxiously loud earlier, seemed to have gone silent. I walked down to the end of my driveway. The sky looked darker than usual, even for a blackout, like the air itself was absorbing light instead of letting the stars come through. It took my eyes a while to adjust before I could see anything beyond the silhouettes of the houses. I just started wondering if the outage covered more than our block when something flickered overhead. I didn't see it at first. I saw the reaction. Every car on the street, every single one gave a quick chirp. Not a blaring alarm, not the kind that flashes lights, just the soft single note they make when someone hits the lock button on a key fob. 16 cars, all chirping once in perfect sync. A couple people shouted in surprise. I froze where I was. Then I saw it. A faint green glow moving silently across the sky. Not bright, not dramatic. More like a soft smear of light drifting maybe 100 feet up. The shape wasn't clear. It didn't pulse, didn't flicker, just floated along at a steady pace. Enough to cast the faintest tint on the rooftops underneath it. It made no sound at all. I waited for someone else to react, but everyone nearby was staring at their cars, trying to figure out if it was some sort of electrical glitch. I don't think they even realized the glow was overhead yet. The thing kept moving down the street, and as it passed each parked car, the car chirped. Precise timing, one after another, like the sound was following it. When it reached the corner near the Simmons house, the last car gave its little beep, and then everything went quiet again. The glow kept drifting. It wasn't heading anywhere obvious. It didn't angle toward the mountains or toward town. It just followed the street like it was tracing the road itself. I stepped farther into the yard to keep it in view. When I moved under the open sky, the air felt different. Thinner somehow, like it pressed in on my ears. The glow slowed. For a moment, it hovered directly above the cul-de-sac. Still no sound, not even the faint whir of wind. The color deepened slightly, not brighter, just richer, like the green had more weight to it. That was when my phone vibrated suddenly in my pocket. I grabbed it, thinking it had finally rebooted, but the screen was still black. The vibration wasn't a notification. It felt more like the phone itself shuddering. I looked around to see if anyone else reacted. Mrs. Alvarez had stepped into the street, staring up now, though I wasn't sure if she actually saw the glow or just sensed something above her. Her candle flame kept bending toward it, like a tiny flag in a steady breeze. Then the glow began to move again. Not forward this time. Down. Only a few feet, but enough that I felt my body tense, like it might drop onto the houses. It hovered there, just lower than before, until I noticed something strange. The shadows on the ground were bending toward it, even the faint ones cast by moonlight. They stretched just slightly, like gravity had shifted. The temperature dropped a few degrees. Not cold exactly, but sharp enough that my sweat cooled instantly. Someone shouted behind me, probably one of the teenagers a few houses down, but the sound cracked weirdly in the air. Not loud or echoing, more like the air swallowed most of it. The glow drifted sideways, no turning, no banking, just sliding smoothly, unnervingly, like something being pulled by invisible strings. It moved over the Simmons house, then over their backyard, then toward the small wooded patch behind the cul-de-sac. As it passed the last car on the street, that car chirped again. Just once, like a final acknowledgement. And then it vanished behind the trees. Not faded, not dimmed, just gone between one blink and the next. The instant it disappeared, the cicadas started up again all at once, like someone hit play on a recording. The air felt normal again. The temperature bumped back up. Mrs. Alvarez's candle straightened. A second later, the power rushed back. Houses lighting up one by one, porch lights flaring, TVs humming to life. People started talking over each other. The teenagers ran into the street yelling about the car alarms. Mr. Alvarez announced that the outage had probably tripped something in all the remotes at once, which made no sense, but everyone nodded anyway. I didn't say anything. I walked back to my porch, sat down, and just listened. Trying to convince myself it had been some weird electrical phenomenon. A transformer surge reflecting off clouds or something. Anything normal. Then my phone lit up on its own. The home screen appeared like nothing had happened, but the time jumped from 9:47 to 9:53 the instant it turned on. 6 minutes gone while the phone was dead in my pocket. I didn't mention that part to anyone either. A few nights later, I went outside again, just to breathe the air and see the sky after a long day. Everything was calm, quiet, normal, but when I stood near the street, my phone vibrated again. No notification, no call, just that same strange, empty buzz. I looked up without thinking, nothing there. No glow, no disturbance, just a clear night sky, but every car on the block chirped once. Soft, perfectly timed, one after another, following something I couldn't see. I woke up because something felt wrong with the air. Not a sound, not a movement, just the strange sense that the room wasn't the way I left it when I went to sleep. I opened my eyes and saw a soft glow coming from the hallway. My first thought was that I'd forgotten to turn off the bathroom light, but the glow wasn't steady. It pulsed faintly, like it had a rhythm. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and listened. The house was silent, the sort of silence you feel in your bones, like the air is holding its breath. Then I realized the glow wasn't coming from one place. It was coming from everywhere. I stepped out of my bedroom and found the living room lamp on. The TV was on, the microwave light, my laptop screen. Even the radio in the kitchen was lit up, every LED blinking. But everything was muted. No sound, no static, just complete silence. The TV screen showed a streaming menu, but no audio. The radio dial was lit but silent. My phone face down on the counter had its flashlight on, but when I picked it up, it didn't respond. It didn't even vibrate. Every device in the house was on, but dead in every other sense. I stood in my kitchen barefoot, trying to make sense of it. There hadn't been a storm, no thunder, no power flicker, and even during outages, things didn't turn on by themselves. I tried speaking out loud just to hear something, and my voice sounded strangely thin. I walked toward the front window, feeling a small knot tightening in my stomach. The blinds were partially open, and even from a few feet away, I could see something wrong with the sky. Not the whole sky, just a single point above the rooftops in the distance. A vertical line of pale white light, like someone shining a flashlight straight downward from the clouds, except there were no clouds, and the light didn't reach the ground. It stopped maybe 100 feet above the houses, hanging there like a column that had been cut short. It flickered every few seconds, dimming almost to nothing and then coming back. Not a strobe, not a pattern. More like it was struggling to stay visible. I should have called someone, but my phone still wouldn't turn on. I held the power button, tried tapping the screen, nothing changed. Just a blank face with the flashlight still shining. I stood at the window, too long, staring. The beam didn't move, didn't drift. It just hovered in place above the neighborhood like it was anchored to something I couldn't see. Then something else shifted, a soft vibration through the floorboards, so faint I almost missed it. Not like a truck passing by, not like machinery. It was too steady, too subtle. It seemed to come through the air, not the ground, even though I felt it under my feet. I opened the front door, not sure why. Maybe because I needed to see if anyone else was awake. Maybe because being inside with all the silent, glowing devices felt worse. The night air hit me with an odd warmth, like I'd stepped into a room that had just been occupied. The street looked normal at first glance, dark houses, quiet yards, no cars passing. But standing there, I noticed a faint hum in the distance. Not close, not loud, more like the memory of a sound. The vertical beam flickered again, brighter for a heartbeat, and the hum grew slightly stronger. As it brightened, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. The rooftops directly beneath the beam were lit with a faint sheen, like a thin layer of frost catching moonlight. Except it wasn't cold, and the air wasn't moving. The sheen didn't look like frost once I focused on it. It was more like the surfaces were being illuminated from a direction that didn't match the beam. I stepped farther onto the porch. The boards vibrated slightly with each flicker. I looked around to see if any neighbors were coming outside, but every house was dark. Completely dark. Their windows showed no light at all. Not even the little glows from phone chargers, microwaves, or alarm clocks. That didn't make sense. If all my devices were on, why were theirs all off? I crossed my yard slowly, the grass damp against my bare feet. When I reached the edge of the street, the hum changed pitch. Slightly higher, like a tuning fork settling. I'd never heard anything quite like it, but it felt weirdly directional, coming from above rather than around. I didn't want to get closer to the beam, but something in me felt like I needed to be in the open to understand what was happening. I took a few more steps down the sidewalk. The beam flickered hard, bright enough to cast a thin shadow behind me, and for a second I thought I saw something inside it. Not a shape exactly, just a distortion, like heat rising off asphalt. A ripple. Then the beam cut out completely. The entire neighborhood went pitch black. I froze. Not even the faint hum remained, just a sudden crushing quiet. Even the insects were silent. For maybe 5 seconds, nothing happened. Then every device in my house clicked off at the same time. I heard it from across the yard, the TV powering down, the microwave light shutting off, the laptop screen dimming. My phone flashlight blinked out suddenly in my hand. The darkness felt thick. I started to turn back toward the house, heart pounding now, when a thin streak of light flashed across the sky, horizontal this time, fast, smooth, and completely silent. It wasn't a shooting star. It didn't arc or fade. It moved in a straight line like someone had dragged a white pencil across the night. Then it was gone. No flicker, no trail. The insects started chirping again. A dog barked a few blocks away. The normal night sounds returned all at once, like someone had pressed play on the world. I walked back to the house slowly. My legs felt shaky, but not from fear exactly. More like whatever had been happening had taken something out of me, like I'd been holding my breath without realizing it. Inside, every device was off again, completely normal. My phone restarted by itself while I was locking the door. The clock on the microwave blinked 12, like the power had just come back on after an outage. But I checked the breaker panel, and nothing had tripped. The power hadn't gone out. It had been overridden. I tried to sleep after that, but every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing that vertical beam hovering above the rooftops. Too bright to ignore, too vague to explain. Around 3 in the morning, I finally checked the time on my phone again. The lock screen showed that it had restarted at 2:41. But the clock on the wall, battery-powered, not electric, said 2:47. 6 minutes missing. Same as the night I saw something else months ago. Same weird gap. I didn't look outside again. I didn't want to risk seeing that beam return. But even now, every time the house goes quiet at night, I wait a few seconds just to be sure the silence isn't about to change. I was sitting in the backyard with my friend Ryan, just killing time after dinner. It was one of those warm, dry summer nights in eastern Colorado where everything feels quiet but not empty. The sky was clear enough that you could see the Milky Way without trying, and we were just leaning back in a couple of old lawn chairs my landlord left behind. We weren't doing anything special, just talking about work, the usual stuff. At one point, Ryan stopped mid-sentence and squinted upward. "Hey," he said, lifting his chin, "that star's weird." I followed his gesture. At first, I didn't even know which one he meant. There were a lot of stars, and I wasn't exactly an expert, but he kept pointing until I found it, a bright white dot a little above the tree line to the west. "What's weird about it?" I asked. "It keeps blinking?" "No, not blinking, something else." I stared at it. It didn't look like much at first. But the longer I watched, the more I noticed it wasn't twinkling like a normal star. The brightness was changing, but not randomly. It was rising and lowering in an actual pattern. Soft, bright, dim, soft, bright, dim, steady, like a slow heartbeat. I opened my mouth to say something when Ryan said, "It's doing that on purpose, right?" I almost laughed, but I didn't. Something about the rhythm made my skin tighten a little. Stars didn't pulse like that. At least not stars I'd ever seen. We watched it for another 30 seconds or so. It didn't move, didn't drift, just pulsed. Then it stopped entirely. It held steady like any other star. "Well," Ryan said, exhaling. "Okay then." We both tried to shrug it off, but the mood shifted. The yard felt too still, the air too warm. I kept glancing back up at that star, even though I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. But once you notice something off, you can't unsee it. After a few minutes, Ryan checked his phone. "I should head out," he said. He lived a few blocks down the street and usually walked when he came over. I told him I'd walk part of the way with him because I wasn't tired yet. We left my yard and started down the sidewalk. Houses were dark, most people already in bed. The streetlights weren't bright, more of a dim amber glow, and they didn't fill the gaps between the poles. It made the spaces between them feel darker than usual. I noticed the star again when we reached the corner. It had started pulsing again. "Dude, look," I said. Ryan groaned but turned around anyway. "Seriously?" We watched it for maybe 20 seconds. Pulse, dim, pulse, dim. "Let's keep walking," he muttered. "I don't like it." We kept going, but I could tell he was watching the ground on purpose, just so he wouldn't have to look up again. A few houses down, the cicadas suddenly cut out. Not slowly, just gone all at once, like someone hit mute on the whole street. Ryan stopped walking. "Did you hear?" "Yeah." He looked at me, uncertain. I didn't say anything because I didn't trust my voice not to shake a little. The silence felt thick. I could hear my own heartbeat, which I usually never notice. Then the streetlight above us flickered once. Not out, just a momentary dip. We looked at each other again. "Maybe a transformer?" I said, though it sounded weak. Before he could reply, a shape crossed overhead. I didn't see the whole thing, just a brief, dark silhouette gliding across the sky, blocking part of the stars as it went. No noise, no wind. Nothing to tell how big or close it was, just a smooth shadow passing above the neighborhood. Ryan swore under his breath. We both looked up at the pulsing star again, but it wasn't pulsing anymore. It was gone. Not dimmed, not faded. Gone. We stood there for maybe a minute, not moving. The cicadas started again, but it didn't help. Their sound felt thin, like background noise in a video instead of something alive. "I'm going home," Ryan said quietly. "I'll text you." I watched him leave, but I didn't head back to my house right away. I don't know why. Something felt unfinished, like if I moved too soon, I'd miss whatever came next. A breeze picked up, hot, dry, not cooling at all. When it brushed past me, I felt a faint pressure against my ears, almost like a plane passing overhead, except the air stayed completely still after. No sound followed, no plane. I looked up at where the star had been, nothing but regular sky. But as I started walking back toward my house, I noticed something else. My shadow. Under the nearby streetlight, it looked normal at first. Then, as I stepped forward, it lengthened unnaturally far behind me, longer than the streetlight should have cast. And the streetlight wasn't flickering. I stopped walking. My shadow didn't. For half a second, maybe less, it lagged, like the ground beneath me was catching up. Then it snapped back into place. I actually gasped. It felt like the bottom dropped out of my stomach. Everything seemed to return to normal after that. My shadow looked fine. The streetlight glowed steadily. But every step back to my driveway felt like wading through a bad dream, where your legs don't quite work right. When I got inside, I locked the door without thinking. I checked the windows. I checked the backyard again through the glass. The sky looked totally ordinary. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I went to brush my teeth, and when I walked back into the living room, I noticed a faint light on the ceiling. A soft circular reflection, like someone standing outside was shining a weak flashlight upward through the window. I pulled the blinds open fast, but nothing was there. Just my yard, my fence, the neighbor's shed. The reflection on the ceiling faded immediately. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept picturing that steady, unnatural pulse in the sky, the rhythm of it, the way it looked intentional. The next morning, Ryan texted me saying he didn't want to talk about it, which was weird because he's usually the type to send 20 messages about anything weird that happens. As the day went on, I checked the sky a few more times without really meaning to. The stars looked normal that night, completely normal. No pulses, no shapes, no shadows acting wrong. But sometimes when I'm outside and letting my eyes adjust, I feel myself staring at the same patch of sky where that star had been, half expecting it to blink back on. Not twinkling, just waiting. I had pulled into the little gravel lot behind Keller's Market because I didn't feel ready to go home yet. It was around 11 on a humid September night, the kind where the air feels thick and the bugs never shut up. I just finished a late shift at the hardware store, and instead of driving straight to my apartment, I grabbed a soda and parked at the edge of the lot, facing the tree line behind the building. Nobody else was there. Keller's closed at 10, and the owner always killed the lights around back, so the only illumination came from a single orange security lamp near the dumpsters. Everything beyond that faded into the woods, which looked pitch black, except for where the sky rose above it. I wasn't doing anything. Just sitting, windows down halfway, radio off. My name's Evan, and I've lived in this town long enough to know that nothing interesting ever happens behind Keller's. It was just a spot to breathe for a minute. I took a sip of my soda when the car moved. Not a big jolt, not like someone hit it. More like the entire vehicle swayed a few inches to the side, the way a boat shifts after a wave. I froze with the can halfway to my mouth. For a second, I genuinely thought my brain made it up. Then, it happened again. A slow, heavy shift, like something huge had brushed past. I rolled the window all the way down and leaned out. There was nobody around. No wind. The trees at the edge of the lot weren't even moving. Everything was dead still except the buzzing insects. I checked the rearview mirror, nothing behind me. I put the soda in the cup holder and rested both hands on the wheel. The car stayed perfectly still now, but I kept imagining that second sway, how steady and deliberate it felt. After maybe 30 seconds, I noticed a faint brightness coming from beyond the tree line. Not a beam, not headlights, just a soft, pale glow, like someone was slowly raising a lantern behind the trees. It drifted upward, barely clearing the branches. It wasn't bright enough to light the woods, but I could see the outline of the tops of the oaks shift as it rose behind them. I turned off my engine so I could hear better. The lot immediately felt too quiet. The bugs were still chirping, but their sound seemed muffled, almost distant. The glow climbed a few feet higher and hovered. It stayed there long enough that I started to think it might just be someone walking the trails with one of those camping lanterns. But then it moved sideways, smooth, straight. No bounce, no unevenness. It slid across the top of the trees like it was attached to a rail in the sky. I sat perfectly still, afraid even to blink. I didn't want to lose sight of whatever it was. My car shifted again, just once, a slow lean to the right and back, as if some invisible weight stepped beside it. This time it felt stronger, like something had displaced the air around me. My ears popped the way they do when you're in a plane. I yanked my feet up off the floor instinctively. I don't know why. Maybe some animal part of my brain expected something to grab my ankles. Even with the windows wide open, the air inside the car felt sealed off, heavy. I forced myself to look toward the tree line again. The glow had stopped moving and just hovered above the woods like a floating ember. I couldn't see a shape behind it, just light. Soft, round, and completely steady. The buzzing of the insects cut out. Not gradually. 1 second they were there, the next the world was silent in a way that made my chest tighten. It felt like all the sound had been sucked out of the lot. The glow brightened for half a second before dimming again. Not a pulse, more like it flickered, but too intentionally to be a glitch of my eyes. My first stupid thought was lightning, but there was no storm, no clouds. The sky above the tree line was perfectly clear. Then the smell hit me. A faint metallic scent, like overheated electronics or the inside of an old battery. It drifted into the car even though there was no wind. I wrinkled my nose and tried to place it, but it wasn't anything familiar from work or home. It wasn't quite burning and not quite chemical, just strange. A deep vibration touched the bottom of my seat. Not shaking, more like the subtlest pressure, as if a heavy truck were idling nearby. Except there was no sound. I leaned out of my window a little, listening. Nothing. Not even distant traffic. Just the vibration that I could feel but not hear. The glow started moving again, this time slowly dropping behind the trees. Instead of making me feel relieved, it made my stomach twist. Something about the way it sank, too smooth, too deliberate, felt wrong. When it finally slipped below the tree line completely, everything around me stayed silent for several long seconds. Then the buzzing of insects returned all at once, loud and messy like a burst of static. I took a shaky breath and reached for my keys. I wanted to go home, but part of me felt like moving would draw attention to myself. Right as I touched the key, my car rocked one more time. This one felt different. Not a sway, but a single, sharp dip, like something heavy had pressed down on the hood for a split second. I jerked back in my seat. The steering wheel creaked from how tightly I was grabbing it. I didn't wait any longer. I turned the ignition, locked the doors out of sheer reflex, and threw the car into reverse. Gravel sprayed as I backed out faster than I should have. As I angled toward the exit of the lot, I glanced once more at the tree line. I didn't want to, but I did. There was nothing there, just dark trees and the faint outline of the hill behind them. But the metallic smell lingered inside the car all the way to my apartment. I parked under the street lamp outside my building and just sat there for a minute, hands still on the wheel. The metal scent finally faded, but I kept expecting the car to move again. It didn't. Inside my apartment, I checked every room, even though that didn't make any sense. I kept thinking I'd see that faint glow through the blinds. I didn't sleep until after 4, and even then it was light and restless. I kept half waking, thinking I felt the mattress shift under me the same way the car had. The next day at work, I mentioned it to my coworker, Leah. Not the glow, just the car movement. She joked that maybe a bear had walked past and shook it, but I didn't see any tracks, and no bear moves that quietly. I dropped it after that. I've gone past Keller's Market plenty of times since, but I haven't parked behind it again. Not at night, not even during the day. And every once in a while, when I'm stopped at a light or parked outside work, I feel the faintest tremor through the seat, just enough to make me sit up straighter. I tell myself it's nothing, that cars make weird little movements all the time, that gravel shifts, that engines cool unevenly. But whenever it happens, I can't help looking toward the nearest tree line, half expecting to see a soft glow drifting just above it, moving in that slow, impossible way. I was about 3 miles up the Pine Wash Trail when it happened. It was late afternoon in early October, the kind where the air in the Utah foothills cools fast once the sun dips. I'd taken the trail alone like I usually did after work, wanting to clear my head before going home. My name's Matt, and I've hiked that trail more times than I can count. Nothing unusual ever happens there. The trail loops around a low ridge before curling back toward the parking area. I was somewhere near that curve when I noticed something odd on the ground off to the right. At first, I thought it was just a spot where someone had set down gear or maybe where a deer had bedded down. But when I stepped closer, it didn't look like that. About 5 feet across, the leaves on the ground were pressed completely flat. Not crushed like someone had stepped on them, pressed. Smooth. Even, like a heavy plate had been set on them and then lifted. Every leaf pointed outward a little, like they'd been pushed from the center. I crouched down and ran my hand over them. They didn't spring back. They were cool, colder than the dirt around them. The air in that circle felt cooler too. I stood up and looked around for some explanation. No footprints, no animal tracks, no sign of a tent or anything like that. Just the trail behind me, the trail ahead, and pine trees shifting quietly in the breeze. I took a few steps back onto the trail, still staring at that ring. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but the camera wouldn't focus. Everything in the frame looked smudged and smeared, like the lens was dirty. I wiped it on my shirt and tried again. Same thing. The center of the screen, the part where the flattened leaves were, just wouldn't focus. I gave up and pocketed the phone, feeling weirdly uneasy. I don't know why the focus thing got to me so much, but it did. I kept glancing back at the ring as I walked. 2 minutes later, something made me stop again. I didn't hear anything. It wasn't like the woods suddenly went silent or anything dramatic like that. It was more like a shift in pressure, like when you're in a plane and your ears are just about to pop, a subtle tightness in the air. I looked up. Directly overhead, the sky seemed wrong. There was a circular blur moving slowly across it, almost invisible if you weren't looking straight at it. It wasn't a cloud. It was too smooth, too perfectly shaped, and it slid across the blue without changing. Imagine smudging something on your phone screen and then moving the smudge around. That's what it looked like. I froze in the middle of the trail and watched it drift. It didn't go fast, just glided along, shifting the light slightly as it passed. Not enough to cast a shadow, but enough that the sky inside the circle looked a shade darker. My first thought was some kind of lens flare in my eyes, or maybe a migraine spot, except it didn't react when I blinked or moved my head. It moved on its own, heading toward the ridge. The air grew colder. Not freezing, just noticeably cooler than it should have been. I rubbed my arms and took a step backward without meaning to. As the distortion drifted farther, I heard a rustle behind me. I whipped around, expecting a deer or maybe another hiker. But nobody was there, just trees. The sound had come from the left side of the trail, maybe 10 feet away, right around the level where the trunk started to thin out. I stared at that spot for a long time, waiting for something to move, but nothing did. When I turned back, the distortion in the sky was almost at the top of the ridge. It hovered for a moment, just stopped completely, and the air pressure feeling got slightly stronger. Not painful, just unnerving. Then the thing faded, not like it flew off, like it dissolved. 1 second it was there, the next the sky was normal again. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My heart was pounding. I felt stupid because I couldn't explain why I was so rattled. Nothing had touched me. Nothing had made a sound. But the hair on my arm stayed standing up. I decided to keep moving, partly because standing still made me feel exposed. I listened hard as I walked, expecting to hear movement in the woods. Every time a twig snapped under my own boots, I flinched. After maybe half a mile, I reached the part of the trail where the trees open up to a small overlook. It's just a rocky shelf where you can see the highway in the distance. I stopped there, trying to shake the unease. The view looked normal. Cars, sunlight, distant traffic noise, all fine. But then something faint brushed my ears. Not exactly a sound, more like a hum too low to hear, but still noticeable. It made my teeth feel weird, like they were vibrating lightly. I turned in a slow circle, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It didn't feel like it came from any direction, just the air itself. I crouched and pressed my fingertips to the ground. It wasn't vibrating, it was just in the air. Right then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I jumped. When I pulled it out, the screen flashed on, then off, then on again, but no notification popped up. The battery percentage dropped from 40% to 12% in a second. I stood there staring at that number, feeling this cold pull in my stomach. Before I could react, the hum stopped, completely. The phone stabilized at 12%. The air warmed slightly. The normal forest sounds came back in gradually. The wind, the bugs, the distant highway. Everything felt like it had snapped back into place. I headed back down the trail fast, faster than I usually walk. The whole hike back, I kept checking the sky. It looked fine, but my eyes kept catching little flickers in my peripheral vision. I told myself it was just nerves. When I finally reached the parking lot, it was empty, except for my car and an older Subaru belonging to a guy I sometimes see on the trail. His name's Greg. He came out of the woods a minute after I arrived, waving like he always does. "You see that weird ring up there earlier?" he asked as he reached his car. My throat went dry. "What ring?" He pointed vaguely toward the ridge. "Up in the sky. Thought it was just my eyes being stupid, like heat waves, but not." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, probably too slowly. Greg shrugged it off, told me to have a good night, and drove away. I sat in my car without starting it, gripping the steering wheel. It wasn't just me. Someone else saw something, but the ring of pressed leaves that I didn't mention. No point. When I finally started the engine, the radio came on even though I'd turned it off earlier. It was tuned to static. Not loud, but a soft hiss. I hit the power button and it didn't respond. After about 10 seconds, the static faded on its own and the radio shut off. The rest of the drive home was quiet. Too quiet. I kept watching the sky through my windshield, half expecting that circular blur to reappear. It didn't. I haven't gone back to Pine Wash since. I keep telling myself I will, that it's just a trail and nothing happened that actually harmed me. But every time I think about rounding that curve again and seeing that perfect ring on the ground, the back of my neck gets tight. And sometimes when I'm outside at dusk, I swear I see a brief smudge drift across the sky. Not always. Not enough to prove anything, but enough to make me look up and hold still until I'm sure the sky looks normal again. I was halfway through telling Naomi about the weird customer from earlier when the wind just stopped. Not slowed, not softened. It cut out like a switch had been flicked somewhere above us. We were walking along the old coastal path that wrapped around the cliffs near Sandmere Point. The kind of place locals swore they loved, but rarely actually used. It was late afternoon, the sky heavy with gray clouds that kept threatening rain but never committing. The ocean below was restless, dull steel blue, waves smacking the rocks in slow, tired rhythms. I noticed the silence first, then the way my hair fell flat against my neck. Naomi stopped too, squinting up. "That feels weird," she said. I looked overhead. The clouds were still moving, sliding west like normal weather, thick and layered, but the air around us stayed dead. The grass stopped bending. The faint salt smell just hung there. No breeze at all. Naomi laughed it off. "Storm's playing games," she said, and kept walking. I followed, but something about it stuck to me. The way everything else kept going, but the wind. Like the space around us wasn't paying attention. A few steps later, the distant waves sounded muffled, like someone threw a heavy blanket over the shoreline. Our footsteps on the gravel path felt louder than they should have been. We kept talking, but it felt forced now. Naomi's voice echoed slightly, even though there was nothing around to bounce the sound back. Halfway down the path, the air grew warmer, not humid, just wrong, like standing too close to someone else's breath. "Do you feel that?" I asked. She nodded, rubbing her arms. "Yeah, I hate this place sometimes." Ahead of us, near the point where the trail narrowed, I noticed the fog rolling in faster than before. Not from the water, but along the cliffs themselves. Thick, pale mist curling over the rock ledge like smoke slipping downward. But even that fog wasn't moving the air. When we reached the narrowing, Naomi slowed. "Let's just turn around. This is creeping me out." That's when everything went quiet. Not just the ocean, not just the wind, no birds, no distant traffic, no waves, just this hollow silence that felt like standing inside a sealed box. I looked around, heart thudding slow and heavy. Above us, the clouds kept drifting, but directly overhead, there was a break forming, a wide oval stretch where the gray thinned out. The edges of it looked smoother than natural. Naomi noticed it too. "Is that normal?" We stood there, shoulders tense, both staring up. In the center of that thinning patch, the light shifted, just slightly. A pale, muted brightness growing through, not sunlight, not moonlight. It didn't cast shadows, it just made the sky look thinner. Then the humming started. Low, steady, barely audible at first, like a distant power line, but there were no towers nearby. It vibrated faintly through my chest, not loud enough to hurt, just enough to register. Naomi swallowed. "Do you hear that?" I didn't answer. I only nodded. The light above pulsed once, soft and hazy, like a slow inhale. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out automatically, but the screen showed no signal, no clock, no anything. Just black. "That doesn't make sense," I muttered. Naomi stepped closer to me, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. "We should go." But neither of us moved. The humming deepened, not louder, just heavier, like it pressed down on everything. My ears felt full, like altitude sickness creeping in. The clouds outside that oval continued their normal drift, but the ones forming the shape held perfectly still, like frozen cotton pulled tight over invisible structure. Then something darker slid behind it. Not a shape with edges, just a deeper shadow, passing under the thin light as though something massive drifted across the underside of the clouds. Naomi whispered, "What is that?" I didn't know. I still don't. It moved slowly, deliberate, as if gliding, and as it passed overhead, the air pressure shifted. I felt it in my jaw, my sinuses, like standing near a large truck, but without noise or wind. My heartbeat felt too loud in my own ears. The humming paused. Absolute silence again. Then a sharper vibration rippled through the ground beneath us, subtle but real. Gravel shifted under our shoes. I finally tore my gaze downward, just out of instinct, and noticed the tall grass to the side was standing perfectly upright, not swaying, not reacting, like it was pinned in place. When I looked back up, the pale light had dimmed slightly, but the darker mass was still there, stretching long, shapeless, slow. Naomi squeezed my arm hard, nails digging through my sleeves. "We need to leave. Now." I nodded, but my legs hesitated, like my body didn't believe what my brain was screaming. The humming returned, softer, almost gentle, and the light began to thin, pulling inward toward the center of that oval space. The shadow shifted once more, like it rotated, and then it faded, not moving away, just dissolving until the cloud cover thickened again. The wind snapped back on. Sudden and sharp, grass bent, fog scattered. Waves grew louder all at once. We both gasped, like underwater swimmers breaking the surface. "What the hell was that?" Naomi breathed. "I don't know," I said, voice shaking, even if I tried to steady it. We didn't walk. We half-jogged back down the path, not looking up again, boots crunching too loudly against the gravel as if to reinforce reality. By the time we reached the parking area, the air felt normal again, cold and coastal and damp. The clouds rolled overhead like any other ugly pre-storm sky. Cars passed on the nearby road. A gull cried somewhere out beyond the cliffs. Everything normal. Too normal. Naomi stood by her car, rubbing her face like she could wipe the moment away. "You felt that, right? The air just stopping?" "Yeah." "And the sound?" "Yeah." She let out a dry laugh that didn't match her eyes. "Good, at least I'm not losing it alone." We didn't hang around, just awkward goodbyes, quick glances back at the sky, and then we drove separate ways. The whole ride home, I kept checking my mirrors and windows, expecting that strange stillness to return. But the breeze kept brushing the roadside trees. Everything moved like it was supposed to. When I got home, my phone suddenly reconnected like nothing ever happened. Messages rolled in from earlier, missed notifications, normal life piling back up. But later, that night, as I stood at my kitchen window, I noticed the clouds drifting slow across the moon again. And for just a second, right where the sky had thinned above the cliff path, one small patch moved differently. Too smooth, too deliberate. The air inside my house stayed perfectly still. The train had been running late all evening, that slow kind of delay that made everyone check their watch every few minutes like it might somehow hurry things up. I sat by the window with my backpack between my feet, watching the reflection of my own tired face blur against the dark glass as the suburbs thinned out into open land. It was just past midnight. The car smelled faintly of old upholstery and hot metal, and every now and then the intercom crackled with someone mumbling about the next stop. A guy a few rows up snored with his head tipped back, and a woman across the aisle kept scrolling through her phone even though the signal had dropped to nothing miles ago. I glanced outside out of habit, expecting the usual streaks of orange and white from distant houses or passing roads. Instead, I saw a line of lights off in the distance that didn't move at all. They weren't scattered or blinking. They formed a perfectly straight horizontal line, low on the horizon, like someone had drawn it carefully with a ruler and set it just above the dark land. Each light was small and pale, almost the same color as a distant street lamp. But something about the way they lined up made my stomach tighten. The train kept rattling forward, trees whipping by close to the tracks, but those lights stayed fixed in the same spot. Not getting closer, not drifting, just sitting there, level and still. I leaned closer to the glass, trying to see if it was maybe a highway or some long stretch of parked cars. But the ground below them looked empty. No glow reflecting on the field. No sign of a road. A few seconds passed. Then more. The line of lights stayed exactly where it was, unbroken. I glanced around the car, half expecting someone else to be reacting, but everyone looked as bored and drained as before. No one seemed to notice anything strange happening outside the windows. I looked back out. The line had not shifted even a little, even though the train had definitely moved a good distance by now. The longer I watched, the more it felt wrong, like those lights were somehow independent of the world around them. They didn't belong to the land or the sky, they just existed in that one place. Then, as the train started curving slightly, the line began to slip out of view. Not because it moved, but because the angle changed. It stayed in the same spot until the last light disappeared behind the edge of the window frame. My reflection filled the glass again. Just my tired face and the faint shine of the interior lights. I leaned back into my seat, trying to let it go. Maybe it really was some distant industrial site or a weird reflection I couldn't quite place. My brain already felt foggy from the late hour and long day. A soft vibration passed through the car, stronger than the usual rumble. Most people shifted slightly in their seats. A few bags jostled on the overhead racks. I checked outside again. This time, the lights were gone completely. Just pitch-black fields and the faint outline of trees under the cloudy sky. I told myself not to think about it too much. The track ahead started running through even more isolated land, the kind of stretch that made the night feel extra quiet. No towns, no farmhouses, just darkness. 10 minutes passed, then maybe 15. I felt the sensation again. A subtle awareness, like someone standing just behind me, even though I knew no one was. I shifted forward, pretending to stretch, and glanced around. The snoring guy hadn't moved. The woman still stared at her phone. Everyone else looked drained and half asleep. I turned back to the window. The line of lights had returned. Exact same formation, same spacing, same pale color. Still low on the horizon, still perfectly straight, but now they appeared slightly closer, though the ground under them did not brighten or change at all. The train rolled onward, the trees and brush flying past. The lights did not react. They didn't shift or flicker. They stayed fixed in space, like they were pinned there. I pressed my forehead lightly against the cool glass, trying to focus hard. No sign of a road, no reflection on the ground, no obvious structure. Just that impossible straight line cutting through the night. My pulse started to pick up. I tried to look away, but my eyes kept returning to it, like my brain refused to drop the pattern. For a moment, one section of the line softened, dimmed slightly, then brightened again to its original intensity. The rest remained constant. A voice crackled over the intercom, announcing a small upcoming stop with a name I barely recognized. The train slowed. The brakes hissed. The lights outside remained frozen in place even as the car gently rolled to a near stop. I watched the line as we waited. It didn't drift, didn't respond. When the train picked back up speed, the lights slowly slipped sideways out of the frame again as the curve of the track shifted my view. They vanished without ever changing position. A heavy, nervous energy settled into me at that point, the kind that made it hard to swallow comfortably. I tried distracting myself by scrolling aimlessly on my phone, though nothing loaded. My mind kept replaying the sight of that line, how wrong it felt. A few minutes later, the train entered a shallow tunnel carved through a low ridge. The windows reflected only the interior lights and the quiet faces of passengers. When we emerged on the other side, the landscape opened into a wide stretch of flat land. The line of lights was back, farther out now, but even longer, extending across a huge portion of the horizon. Completely straight, completely still. My chest tightened. I sat very still, watching. Something about it felt too deliberate, like the lights were aware of the train moving through the darkness, aware of this exact stretch. A faint hum drifted in through a crack in the window, or maybe from somewhere deeper in the car. It didn't match the train's usual mechanical rhythm. The line didn't change, but the area around it felt subtly different, like the darkness itself had shifted tone. I checked the time on my phone. Just after 1:30 a.m., I tried to mark how long I'd been watching, but the sense of time felt slippery, as if it refused to settle. When the train finally began approaching the outskirts of the next town, small scattered lights appeared closer to the tracks, drowning out the distant horizon. The straight line faded into the general clutter of normal nighttime illumination and then vanished entirely from view. I sat there for a long moment, staring at where it had been. The train pulled into the station with its familiar screech and shudder. A few people got off. A cool breeze slipped in through the open doors. I remained seated, still uneasy but unable to explain why. The rest of the ride passed without anything else that's strange happening. Just the slow return to familiar neighborhoods and the faint glow of real streetlights drifting past in messy, human patterns. When I finally stepped off at my stop, the night air felt heavier than usual. I stood on the platform and looked out toward the dark horizon one last time. There was nothing there now, just scattered lights and low clouds. Still, as I walked home, the image of that perfectly straight line stayed fixed in my mind, like it had never been part of the landscape at all, only waiting somewhere beyond the normal view, exactly where the train had been passing. I noticed the dark shape before I even registered what it was doing. I'd stopped on a pull-off above the Mogollon Rim, just outside a tiny place called Clover Springs, staring up at a clear night sky that felt way too big and quiet. The nearest town lights were miles away, so the stars looked sharp, almost harsh. Then one section of sky started going dim, like something wide and solid was sliding in front of it. It didn't look like a cloud. It moved too clean, too steady, and there was no sound, no wind picked up, no rush of air. Just a smooth, slow blackness crossing the stars, blotting them out as it went. I stood there with my hands jammed in my hoodie pockets, trying to convince myself it was some weird low cloud or maybe the shadow of a high-altitude plane. But there were no blinking lights, no engine noise, nothing that felt normal about it. My name is Aaron Valdez. I'd driven out there after work because my head felt crowded and I needed space. The day had been hot and dry, that baked kind of heat that sticks to your skin even after the sun drops. By the time I reached the overlook, the air had cooled just enough to be bearable, and the sky was clear as glass. The shape kept moving, silent and heavy, like the night itself was sliding. It crossed about a third of the sky, and then slowed, almost pausing. The stars behind it vanished, like something wide and flat was blocking them. I held my breath and waited for a sound that never came. Then it resumed its glide and faded so gently I almost doubted I'd seen anything at all. I stood there longer than I meant to, staring where it had moved, my eyes searching for texture or edges or anything that made sense. The sky went back to normal. Millions of stars, quiet and distant. I climbed back into my car and told myself it had to be some trick of depth or light. A thin cloud, a long, low aircraft, something explainable. As I pulled back onto the narrow road, the feeling stayed with me, like I'd stepped into the wrong frame of a film. A few minutes later, my phone lost signal completely. No bars. That wasn't unusual out there, but it happened right when the air inside the car started feeling oddly still, almost heavy. The vents were off, windows cracked slightly, and yet the air stopped moving, like it had settled. Then the radio flicked to static without me touching it. I reached for the knob, turned it, and the static turned into a faint low tone. Not music, not interference, just a dull vibrating sound that felt more than heard. I glanced up through the windshield and saw the shape again. This time it wasn't blocking stars. It hovered above the ridge line ahead, darker than the sky but not completely solid. It looked like a long smudge stretched across the upper horizon, moving sideways in a way that didn't line up with anything natural. I slowed the car almost to a stop. The tone from the radio deepened slightly. The dash lights flickered for a split second, then settled. The shape slid further right, smooth as if pulled on an invisible track. No flicker, no rotation, just quiet movement. I realized I was gripping the steering wheel too tightly and forced my hands to loosen. My pulse felt loud in my ears. I watched it, waiting for it to react to me somehow, but it didn't. It just kept gliding, like it existed on its own schedule. It faded again, dissolving into the night sky as if absorbed by the darkness. The radio clicked back to silence. I sat there in the middle of the road for a few seconds before slowly driving home. The rest of the drive felt wrong, like the space around me had shifted slightly. I kept checking the mirrors, the sky, the sides of the road, expecting it to reappear. It didn't. At home, my sister Marisol texted asking if I wanted to grab breakfast the next morning. I responded like everything was fine, even though I still felt that uneasy sense of being noticed, even inside my own place. I tried to sleep, but I kept waking up, thinking I saw shadows moving across the ceiling that never quite lined up with passing cars or the moon. Just before 6, I heard a faint vibration through the walls. Not loud, just a low, distant tremor. I sat up and listened. Outside, the air looked pale gray. Early morning light creeping in. I walked to the front door and opened it. The world looked normal. Quiet suburban street, a few parked cars, no sign of anything unusual. Then I noticed the tops of the trees at the end of the block moving slightly, even though the air around me felt completely still. And above them, just barely visible in the brightening sky, that same dark form moved again. Slower this time, almost patient. My stomach tightened. It passed behind a thin bank of rising cloud and faded away, leaving the sky looking ordinary and empty. No sound followed, no rush, just an absence that felt wrong. The rest of the day passed strangely. Time felt stretched, moments slipped without me quite noticing. My phone clock was fine, but I kept getting the sense I'd lost tiny pieces of time without any memory of what happened in between. By evening, the sky was clear again, the heat settling into a mild breeze. I debated going out to the overlook to see if it would happen again, but the thought filled me with a quiet dread I couldn't explain. Instead, I paced around my living room until the dark fully settled. And then the lights flickered. Not off, just a quick dip in brightness. The air pressure shifted slightly, like something heavy passed nearby. My ears picked up that faint low hum again, distant and steady. I walked out to the backyard, heart beating a little faster now, and looked up. There it was. The shape carved a smooth path across the stars, stretching lengthwise like an enormous silhouette. It moved with a calm, deliberate pace, as if it had all the time in the world. It blocked constellations piece by piece as it went. Orion disappeared behind it, then reappeared as the dark mass slid onward. I tracked it until my neck started to ache. I couldn't judge how high it was or how far away. It defied scale entirely. When it reached the far edge of the sky, it didn't speed up or change. It simply faded like it thinned into the night itself. The hum faded with it. I stood still long after it was gone, staring at empty air, trying to wrap my head around what I'd seen. My hands felt cold. My thoughts felt slow. Nothing followed. No explanation formed. Just quiet and distance and the sky going back to normal. Eventually I went inside and locked the door. I sat at the kitchen table until the stars blurred slightly from tired eyes, Sometime after midnight, I finally crawled into bed. Exhaustion crept over me whether I wanted it or not. Outside, the night stayed silent, and even as sleep pulled me under, I had the lingering sense that something vast had simply passed through, not caring whether I understood it at all. A soft mechanical hum filled the night for several seconds. When it stopped, the silence felt unnaturally deep. I was sitting on the back steps of my cousin's coastal cabin in Port Ainslie, trying to cool off after a long day of hauling firewood and fixing a busted fence panel. The air was damp and warm, one of those sticky late summer evenings where the ocean breeze barely did anything. It was just past 10, and the sky was a dull purple fading into black. No stars yet, just low clouds drifting in from the water. My name is Lila Monroe. I'd driven out to stay a few nights alone while my cousin Trevor was away for work. He always said the place was quiet and peaceful, but that hum didn't feel peaceful at all. It wasn't loud, but it was clear, steady, almost clean, like the sound of something running smoothly on its own terms. I leaned forward, trying to identify where it was coming from. The small gravel drive beside the cabin was empty, just my dusty Subaru and a couple old kayaks stacked against the shed. The trees stood still. No breeze, no rustling. The waves rolled gently in the distance. When the hum cut off, the silence pressed in hard. Too hard, like the world had paused to listen. I stayed seated, heart starting to go faster, waiting for it to return. It didn't. Instead, the distant ocean sounded weirdly faint, like someone had turned the volume down. I stood up and walked a few steps onto the sand, barefoot, letting the coolness ground me. The clouds above drifted slowly, but even their movement felt muted. I swear the night air felt thicker around my shoulders. A faint glow shimmered to the left, near the edge of the shore. Not bright, just a soft haze, almost like moonlight catching on mist, except the moon wasn't even out yet. I squinted at it. The glow slid sideways along the waterline, smooth and level, then blinked out. "Okay," I said quietly, more to hear my own voice than anything else. I walked closer to the shoreline, wet sand squishing under my feet. Every few steps I glanced back at the cabin, its porch light steady and normal. No flickering, no weirdness, just a plain yellow bulb over a screen door. The hum returned, shorter this time, vibrating faintly through my chest. I could feel it more than hear it, like when a truck passes too close, except nothing was moving. My shoulders tensed. I turned slowly in a full circle. Still nothing. Then the hum vanished again, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt like even the insects had stopped. I didn't like that at all. A few seconds later, a thin reflection slid across the surface of the water, as if something unseen just below it had moved. There wasn't a splash, no ripples, just a subtle shift in how the light looked. I backed up a step. Another faint reflection passed closer to shore, then faded as if it had dipped beneath the surface. The water looked calm again, but I felt watched in a way that didn't match the empty beach around me. I started walking back toward the steps, keeping my eyes on the shoreline the whole time. The sand felt colder now, and the air carried a strange heaviness. Halfway back, the hum returned, longer and steadier. It almost felt like it was above me now. I tilted my head up. The clouds glowed faintly in one spot, directly overhead, a soft, milky patch where everything else remained dark. The glow was stable, not flashing, not pulsing, just hanging there, quiet and wrong. My heart thudded in my ears. I stood frozen, staring up. The glow shifted slightly to the east, smooth and controlled, and the hum shifted with it, like they were tied together. A few seconds passed, then maybe 10. I lost track. The glow slowly dimmed until the clouds looked normal again. The hum faded right along with it. The silence afterward hit even harder than before. My ears felt like they were underwater. I forced myself to move, walking faster now, climbing the steps to the porch. The wooden boards creaked under my weight, a familiar sound that suddenly felt comforting. Inside, the cabin air was cooler, carrying the faint smell of salt and pine cleaner. I closed the sliding door and locked it, my hands shaking more than I wanted to admit. For a minute, nothing happened. Then the hum came back, softer, almost distant, like it was farther away now. I pressed my forehead lightly against the glass, trying to see through the reflection into the night. Outside, the sand looked the same. The trees stood still. The shoreline glimmered faintly. A soft band of light slid across the water again, slower this time. It arced slightly, then straightened as if adjusting its path. Still no splash, no sound. Every nerve in my body tightened. The light drifted farther out, then stopped completely. Just hung there, faint but distinct, hovering maybe a few feet above the surface. The hum decreased until it was barely noticeable, more like a pressure shift in sound. I waited, barely breathing. The water beneath that faint glow remained perfectly still. After what felt like a long while, the light dimmed and folded into the darkness until it was gone. The hum disappeared with it. I kept staring long after it vanished, expecting it to rush back or flare up brighter. Nothing did. Eventually, the normal ocean sounds returned. Gentle waves, a distant gull, a whisper of breeze. The night felt slightly less heavy, but not normal. Not right. I stayed inside for the rest of the evening, lights low, trying to distract myself with the old TV. Trevor kept beside the couch. Every now and then, I swore I could still feel a faint vibration in the floor, though that might have been my nerves refusing to calm down. Before heading to bed, I checked out the window one last time. The shoreline looked ordinary again. Dark water, pale sand, quiet trees. As I turned away, the glass caught a faint shimmer for a split second, like the afterimage of a light had just passed by. When I looked back, there was nothing there. The cabin stayed silent after that, but the air never fully felt the same. Like the night had pressed its hand against the world for a moment and pulled away, leaving behind an invisible mark that refused to fade. The knock came at my door before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. I just rolled out of bed, still half asleep, and I almost ignored it because it was too early for anything good. When I opened the door, my neighbor Marlene stood there in her housecoat, hair still a little wild, eyes wide in a way that made my chest tighten before she even spoke. "You know there were lights all over your house last night?" she asked. "What?" I said, probably too flat. Bright ones, not like cop lights, not like a car. They were right over your roof, moved slow and quiet. I blinked at her. "I was asleep, Marlene. I figured, that's why I didn't call you. But I watched them for a while, around 2, maybe 2:30. They just hovered. Then they went out." I stared past her at the front yard, trying to piece it together. The street looked normal, damp from the overnight drizzle, gray sky pressing low, sparrows hopping around the bushes. "You sure it was my place?" I asked. "Yes, Nolan. This house." I stood at my window and watched them. "I thought maybe you were having work done or something, but there was no truck." "Okay," I said, forcing a small laugh. "Probably just reflections or something weird in the fog." She didn't smile back. It wasn't foggy. It was clear. After she walked back to her place, I shut the door and stood there longer than necessary, listening to the quiet inside. My name is Nolan Reeves, and I'd lived in this small place outside Maplebrook for 5 years without anything stranger than raccoons tipping over my trash. Her words stayed sitting in my chest. I remembered the outdoor camera over my garage, the cheap one I'd installed after someone tried my car handle a few months back. I grabbed my phone and opened the app, scrolling through the timeline. Sure enough, there was a spike at 2:14 a.m. Motion detected. I tapped the clip. The screen showed my front yard bathed in ordinary moonlight, the driveway, the bushes swaying slightly. Then, about 5 seconds in, the whole image turned blinding white. Not a flash like lightning, more like someone turned the sun on for a second. Then black. When the feed returned, the yard looked normal again. No figures, no shadows, no movement, just that wash of light, then darkness, then empty yard. I watched it 4 more times, hoping I missed something. There was nothing. I checked the timestamp. It skipped from 2:4:36 to 2:15:59. A minute and 23 seconds just gone. I felt a chill that didn't match the temperature in the room. I tried the backyard camera next. Same thing. Slight brightening, full whiteout, then normal image with an awkward gap in time. Nothing else registered. No movement across the yard. No car headlights sweeping past. No branch swaying violently. Just that soft burn of light and missing time. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at my phone, listening to the hum of the fridge and the faint ticking of the wall clock. My dog, Rufus, wandered in and sniffed my leg before settling at my feet, calm and unbothered. "You notice anything last night?" I asked him, half joking. He just yawned. All morning I kept checking the feed, replaying the same moment. Around noon, I stepped outside to look around the property. The grass looked the same. No scorch marks, no depression in the dirt, no anything. If I hadn't seen the video, I never would have known something had happened. The rest of the day dragged. Clouds rolled in thick and low, the air heavy and damp. The normal sounds of the neighborhood drifted around me, but felt oddly distant. That night, I left the porch light on and kept the camera feed open on my tablet, set beside the couch. I didn't tell anyone else. Didn't feel like trying to explain how a white light erased a piece of time without sounding ridiculous. Around 1:30 a.m., Rufus lifted his head suddenly. "What is it?" I murmured. He stared toward the front door but didn't bark. A few seconds later, my tablet screen flared white. The camera feed vanished into brightness again. This time I watched it happen live, heart hammering hard enough to feel in my neck. No sound came with it, no hum, no crackle. Just light. Everywhere. Then silence, darkness. Then the normal yard returned. The timestamp jumped again. My skin crawled in a way that wasn't panic, just sharp recognition that I was aware of something I wasn't supposed to understand. I got up slowly and peeked through the curtain. Outside looked normal. The sky was overcast, dull silver, no stars visible, the street empty. Marlene's porch light hummed gently across the road. Rufus whined softly at my feet. "Easy, buddy," I whispered. I stayed like that for a few minutes before going back to the couch. The air in the house felt heavier somehow, like it held more weight. I kept the tablet on, but nothing else happened. The next morning, Marlene knocked again. "They came back," she said without greeting. "Same lights, same spot, right over your roof." "Did you get a look at them?" I asked. "Not clearly, they weren't sharp, just bright and kind of spread out, like a glow too close to the ground." "How long did they stay?" "A minute or two, then just gone." "Any sound?" "Nope," I nodded, trying to stay calm. "Probably some weird electrical thing then." She studied my face like she didn't believe me, then shrugged and walked away. That night, I didn't watch the feed. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the moment it might happen again. The house creaked like normal. Pipes shifted. Down the road, a car passed. At 2:11 a.m., the bedroom walls brightened faintly. Not enough to blind me this time. Just a soft, pale glow creeping through the curtains, like headlights parked too close. I sat up slowly. The light strengthened, bathing the edge of the room without casting sharp shadows. Outside, somewhere above the roof, that same quiet presence hovered again. I couldn't see it directly, only feel the change it made in the night around me. I waited for the familiar flicker of the camera audio alert. Nothing pinged, just the glow. Then it faded. Gone again. By morning, the footage showed the same whiteout and lost time as before. No trace of motion, no sign of what passed through my yard. The days went back to normal after that, but the sense that something had noticed my house refused to leave. Every night, I locked the doors a little more deliberately and listened to the quiet just a second longer, and every now and then, when the yard sat too still and the sky looked just a little too pale, I caught myself wondering what had come close enough to wash my whole world in light and then vanish without ever showing its shape. The signal dropped without any warning. 1 second my phone showed full bars, the next it read no service. I was standing at the edge of the public overlook near Blue Ridge Cutoff, a spot where the hills dipped low enough to see all the way across the valley. It was late afternoon, the kind of overcast day that never quite committed to rain, just heavy gray clouds hanging low and dull. A chill crept through the air even though it was still technically spring, and the breeze smelled faintly like damp soil and pine. My name's Julian Mercado, and I'd pulled over there just to stretch my legs after a long drive from work. No big reason. The road behind me stayed quiet, and down below the trees and brush swayed gently in the wind. I frowned at my screen and gave it a tap, thinking it was just lagging. Still nothing. I waited a few seconds, then switched airplane mode on and off. No change. The phone felt warm in my palm for no reason, even though I hadn't been using it much at all. "Great," I muttered. Normally, even in that area, I still had at least one bar, but now it stayed blank. I stepped closer to the railing, looking out across the hills while waiting for the signal to return. The clouds pressed low, almost flat in their stillness. The air felt oddly quiet. like the background noise of the world had been turned down just a little. I glanced left and right. No one else stood at the overlook. No cars pulled in. No distant chatter carried on the wind. A faint pressure hung in the air, not strong, just enough to make me aware of it. I checked my phone again. Still dead. I sighed and slid it into my pocket, deciding I'd just give it a minute. Sometimes the service came back on its own. Another minute passed. No change. I could still hear the whisper of wind through the tall grass and the faint creak of the metal railing as it shifted under my weight, but something about the overall quiet felt wrong in a way I couldn't put my finger on. Then the sky flickered. Not lightning, not a clear flash. More like someone turned up the brightness for half a second, a pale wash of light spreading across the low clouds before settling back into gray. It was subtle enough that I could have talked myself out of seeing it if it hadn't made my eyes widen instantly. "What was that?" I whispered. I tilted my head back, scanning the cloud cover for any sign of break or movement. The overcast remained thick and uniform, no shape or source for that brief light. My phone vibrated slightly in my pocket. I pulled it out quickly. Signal bars reappeared, full again like nothing had ever happened. Before I could even react, the sky flickered again, a wider pulse this time, more visible. The clouds brightened faintly, bathing the overlook in a pale, cold glow that lasted just a second longer than before, then vanished. Still no sound, no thunder, no crackle, no rumble, just light and then nothing. My mouth felt dry. I stepped away from the railing, heart tapping harder than made sense for something so quiet. I checked my phone screen instinctively. Everything worked. Messages loaded, notifications appeared that had been delayed just a few minutes before. It was like time itself had paused for a beat and then snapped back into place. The air felt thicker now, as if the light had left a faint residue behind it. I glanced toward the tree line below, half expecting something solid to be moving out there now that the sky had reacted. Nothing stood out, just hills folding into shadow and slow drifting greenery. A third flicker spread across the clouds, softer, more drawn out. It didn't illuminate the ground. It didn't cast shadows. It just shifted the tone of the sky for a moment, then disappeared again. My chest tightened. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but the idea hit me suddenly that I didn't want to be standing in open space if something else decided to happen next. I tucked my phone into my jacket and turned slowly toward my car. As I walked, the feeling of being watched crept in bit by bit. Not a sudden realization. Just that subtle sense that something beyond my normal sight had become aware of my presence. I forced myself not to look back immediately. Then I did anyway. The overlook stayed empty, the railing cold and worn, the sky dull and heavy, no extra light now. I reached my car and opened the door, glancing up one more time before getting inside. The clouds remained motionless. The dull gray horizon didn't shift. I slid into the driver's seat and shut the door, sealing myself into something familiar and contained. The faint hum of the engine starting felt more comforting than I expected. Still, I didn't drive off right away. Another flicker brushed the sky, even fainter this time, like the pale memory of the last two pulses. And then silence settled back in. I put the car in reverse. Halfway through pulling back, my phone buzzed against my thigh. A text from my friend Naomi. "You back yet? Signal cut out when I tried calling." I stared at the message longer than necessary. "Just stopped a second," I typed. "Weird service out here." No more flickers followed as I eased onto the road. The drive home stayed quiet, the world outwardly normal again. Trees blurred past, the road stretched in its usual winding line. The faint vibration of tires against pavement grounded me with every mile. Still, every time the clouds seemed to brighten just slightly from passing sunlight or reflective glare, my spine stiffened. By the time I reached town, the sky had cleared enough that bits of pale blue peeked through the upper layers. Life continued around me like nothing had happened. But the subtle break in the sky lingered in my thoughts, lodged there without explanation. When I finally parked outside my apartment and stepped out, the phone worked normally again. Bars full, notifications lining up as if nothing had interrupted them at all. I glanced upward one more time without really thinking about it. The sky remained its usual muted gray, drifting slowly, no sign of that pale flash anywhere. Still, the memory of that quiet flicker stayed with me, the way it arrived and vanished with no warning. like a moment shared between me and something that never needed to explain itself. The porch light flickered twice and went out completely, leaving the front steps in shadow. I was standing just inside the screen door, one hand on the knob, watching it like maybe it would magically turn back on if I stared long enough. It didn't. The rest of the house was lit up behind me, but the yard suddenly felt darker than it should have. It was a cool, damp evening, one of those early spring nights where the ground still held moisture and the air smelled faintly like wet concrete and budding plants. A thin layer of fog clung low to the grass and drifted toward the street in slow patches. My name's Marissa Coleman, and I lived alone in a small, split level on the edge of a quiet neighborhood in Everett Hills. Nothing fancy, just a few blocks of nearly identical houses, trimmed lawns, and the occasional barking dog. The porch light had been working fine an hour earlier. I'd flipped it on out of habit before taking the trash out. Now it sat dead, and the bulb didn't even glow faintly. Great timing, I muttered. I stepped out onto the porch, the cool air immediately brushing against my arms. The motion sensor on the driveway light didn't trigger, which felt wrong. Usually even a breeze would set it off. I glanced up instinctively, checking the fixture above the door, then scanned the yard. That's when I noticed it. A soft, pale light hovered just above the roofline, slightly to the right of the chimney. Not bright, not flashing, just a gentle glow like something dim and steady floating in place. It wasn't a star, it sat too low and too close. It also didn't move. I froze, staring at it. The light held steady, suspended in a way that didn't make sense. It had no clear shape beyond a soft, rounded blur and no visible source. No beam, no reflection, just presence. I tried to rationalize it. A drone, maybe? A reflection? Some weird angle of a street lamp? But it stayed silent. No hum, no buzz, no mechanical noise at all. The air around me felt unnaturally cold now, or maybe I'd just gone tense without realizing it. "Hello?" I called out, feeling immediately ridiculous for saying anything at all. The light didn't respond. It lingered for what felt like 10 seconds, maybe more, and then slowly faded until the sky was empty again. Just dark roof shingles and a drifting veil of fog. My chest felt tight, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. I waited, eyes locked on the same patch of sky, expecting it to return. Nothing happened. The porch light remained dead. I stepped down off the porch, moving cautiously across the damp walkway, trying to inspect the fixture, as if that somehow explained what I'd just seen. I reached up and twisted the bulb slightly. It stayed dark. Behind me, the yard sat silent and still. No crickets, no distant traffic noise, just quiet. I glanced up again. Nothing. Only the faint outline of the roof and a heavy gray sky. I told myself it was probably a wiring issue and made my way back inside, locking the door. The normal hum of the refrigerator and soft tick of the living room clock should have settled me, but they didn't. I kept drifting toward the front windows, peeking through the blinds every few minutes, half expecting to see that glow return. It didn't. After a while, I forced myself to sit down, turned on the TV just for background noise, and tried to move on with the night. Around 10:30, I noticed something else. The hallway felt oddly dim, like shadows had shifted even though the lights hadn't changed. The porch light still refused to turn on, no matter how many times I flipped the switch. I finally gave up and went to bed, telling myself I'd deal with it in the morning. Sleep came in uneven waves. I kept waking to small sounds, subtle creaks, the soft groan of the house settling, things totally normal that suddenly felt louder. At one point I heard a faint thump outside, like something brushing the siding. I lay still, listening. Silence returned. Eventually exhaustion pulled me back under. When I woke the next morning, gray light filtered through the curtains. The porch light was still off. I made coffee and stepped outside just to check the yard. Everything looked normal, grass damp with dew, a faint mist lingering along the fence line. Not a single sign that anything unusual had hung over my roof the night before. The fixture itself looked fine. No cracks, no burnt smell, nothing out of place. I flipped the switch again. The light came on instantly. A warm yellow glow spread over the porch like it had never failed at all. I stared at it for a long moment. That evening, when dusk settled again and the fog crept back in, I sat by the window instead of on the porch, watching the sky with more attention than I ever had before. The porch light stayed on. Everything looked the way it should. Still, a strange tension sat in the back of my mind as the night deepened, like I was waiting for something I couldn't name. Around midnight, the light flickered once more. Just once. I watched as the world outside darkened again, my heart thudding quietly in my chest. My eyes drifted upward toward the roofline, scanning the sky for any hint of that pale presence. This time, nothing appeared. Just fog, shingles, and the blank quiet of the night. The light snapped back on after a few seconds and stayed steady. I didn't move. I kept staring through the glass, unwilling to look away, as if turning my back would make something unseen drift back into place above the house. But the sky remained empty, and even as normal sounds slowly returned, distant cars, a faint dog bark, the whisper of wind brushing leaves, the sense that something had briefly paused over my roof, watched for a moment, and then slipped away, never fully left the air. It started with that weird feeling in my chest, like someone was standing close behind me even though the sidewalk was empty. I was walking home from the late shift at O'Rourke's Pharmacy, taking the usual route through the older part of town where the streetlights were spaced too far apart and half of them flickered like they'd given up trying. It was close to midnight. Fog rolling in from the river a few blocks over, thick enough to blur the edges of everything without fully hiding it. My name's Declan Moore, and I'd made this walk 100 times before without thinking about it. Same cracked concrete, same leaning stop sign, same quiet stretch of houses that never seemed to sleep. But that night, every step felt watched. Not the casual kind of watched you get when someone's car slows down or a stranger walks by. This felt heavier, focused, like an awareness that followed just a little too closely to ignore. I glanced over my shoulder the first time and saw nothing, just the glow of a street lamp diffused through fog and the empty road curving back toward the intersection. I kept moving. The feeling didn't fade. It stayed, clinging to the space just behind my shoulder blades, tightening every time my mind tried to relax. My footsteps echoed faintly. The fog curled low around my ankles. Somewhere a dog barked once and went quiet again. I checked over my shoulder a second time. Still nothing. No one's there, I muttered under my breath, mostly to convince myself. The sense of being watched sharpened instead. My posture stiffened without me meaning to. My pace slowed as my eyes kept drifting upward, scanning the rooftops, the tree line, the gaps between houses. That's when I noticed it. A faint point of light sat behind the clouds above the street, barely visible through the haze. Not bright like a plane beacon, not twinkling like a distant star, just a small, pale dot resting behind the fog layer. It held still for a second, then shifted slightly. My stomach dropped. I slowed to a stop, eyes fixed on it. The light slid backward, almost like it noticed me noticing it, and then slipped behind a heavier stretch of cloud and vanished. The sky returned to its dull gray-orange glow from the city lights. I stood there longer than made sense, staring upward, waiting for it to reappear. Nothing. The fog drifted lazily, swallowing the empty space where the light had been. I released a breath I hadn't realized I held and started walking again, telling myself it was probably a plane at just the wrong angle, or some reflection bouncing off moisture in the air. Still, that sense of being watched didn't go away. If anything, it got sharper. I kept glancing up now, scanning for another glimpse of that faint dot. The sky stayed blank, yet the awareness lingered like eyes pressing in from every direction. My boots scuffed against gravel where the sidewalk broke near the old baseball field, and the feeling intensified again, enough that I actually stopped outright and turned around fully. Nothing behind me, just fog, lamplight, and quiet streets. "Okay," I whispered, feeling more unsettled by my own voice echoing back faintly than by the silence. I turned forward and continued, shoulders tight, jaw clenched. A block later, as I passed the empty lot where the old Miller place had burned down years ago, the air shifted. Not colder, not warmer, just heavier. The watched feeling pressed closer. I looked up instinctively. The faint light had returned. This time, it sat slightly to the right, barely visible through the fog, like a pinprick held in place behind a thin curtain. It didn't pulse or flash, it simply hovered, steady and aware. I slowed again, heart thudding. The light slipped sideways, smooth and controlled, before tucking itself behind another patch of cloud and fading from sight. The fog swallowed it whole. The silence around me thickened, no dogs, no wind, no passing cars, just my breathing, and that quiet, hovering sense of attention. I quickened my pace, shoes tapping faster now against the pavement as I tried to put distance between where I stood and whatever seemed to be watching from above. The streetlights ahead glowed dimmer through the mist, stretching like weak guides toward the neighborhood turn. Behind me, nothing followed that I could see. Yet that awareness stayed locked onto me, moving as I moved, staying just out of sight. My chest tightened. My hands felt clammy despite the cool air. When I reached the corner near Kinsley Drive, I dared another glance up. For a brief second, the light flickered into view again, just barely there, hovering behind the thicker band of clouds. Then gone. My pace turned practically into a brisk walk, every step louder now in my ears. "Just get home," I muttered. The final stretch toward my place closed in slowly, despite how fast I felt like I was moving. The moment I stepped onto my block, the feeling dulled slightly, like whatever had been watching no longer hovered directly overhead, but still lingered nearby. I glanced up again, more cautious than curious. The sky returned to normal. No glow, no faint pinprick, only the fog drifting silently over dark rooftops. The sense of eyes faded little by little as I reached my front steps, though tension still clung to my spine as I unlocked the door. Inside, the familiar smell of old wood and cleaning spray greeted me like relief. I shut and locked the door, resting my forehead briefly against the cool glass. The silence inside felt heavier than usual. I moved through the hallway, switching on lamps, letting warm light fill each room as if it could guard against the unease I couldn't explain. Eventually, I found myself standing by the living room window, curtain pulled back slightly as I scanned the sky outside. No light appeared, yet for a long while I didn't feel completely alone. Minutes passed, then more. Gradually, the normal sounds of the world filtered back in. A distant car hum, the slow tick of the kitchen clock, the pipes settling in the walls. The watched feeling ebbed to a faint whisper, and then faded entirely. But even as everything returned to what looked like normal, every time the fog thickened near the clouds and I glanced upward, I half expected to see that pale point hovering again, slipping just out of sight like it never quite intended to be known. The air felt thicker the second I stepped onto the trail. It wasn't subtle either. I'd walked this same path behind Miller's Ridge 100 times before. It was my regular spot to clear my head after work. Packed dirt, scattered pine needles, a few loose rocks, nothing complicated. I could have walked it blindfolded. That afternoon, though, something felt off the moment my boots hit the first bend. The sky had that dull, overcast look that usually meant rain later, but it hadn't started yet. Just heavy gray clouds sitting low and stubborn. The trees looked normal. The birds sounded normal. Still, the air around me felt wrong, like it had weight. I slowed my pace without really meaning to. Every step took more effort than usual, like walking through humidity that shouldn't have been there in mid-October. My name's Trevor Hargrove. I lived about 10 minutes from the trail in a quiet edge-of-town neighborhood where most people waved but didn't really talk. I'd grown used to the peace. So the silence pressing in that day stood out immediately. The wind had dropped completely. Not a leaf moved. I continued forward, telling myself I was imagining things, but my shoulders stayed tense. The usual sounds faded into this weird, muffled calm that felt like being underwater without the pressure. About 50 yards ahead, just past the narrow section where the trees grew closer together, I saw it, a faint shimmer hanging between two trunks. It wasn't bright. It wasn't even clearly defined. Just a wavering patch of air that looked slightly distorted, like heat rising off asphalt. Except there was no heat. I stopped dead. My heart thudded harder than it should have for something so quiet. The shimmer pulsed gently, almost breathing. Not light, not dark, just a disturbed look in the air that didn't match anything else around me. I swallowed and took a thin step closer. Every instinct told me not to. The pressure in the air intensified slightly as I moved forward, like the silence itself thickened. My breath sounded loud in my ears. "Hello?" I said quietly, even though I had no idea why I was speaking. No response. The shimmer wavered again, its edges blurring and reforming. For a second, I thought I saw a shape behind it, but it never fully came into view. just the suggestion of something slightly darker than the space around it. Then the birds stopped, all at once. No chirping, no rustle, nothing. The silence pressed so hard it almost rang. I froze, eyes locked on the distortion, and then it faded. Not snapped away, not vanished, just slowly thinned out like mist until the air looked normal again. The weight in the atmosphere lifted subtly, but not completely. I stood there, breathing shallow, waiting for anything else to happen. Nothing did. The forest sounds returned in scattered pieces. A few leaves shifted. Somewhere farther down the ridge, a squirrel rustled through brush. But the uneasy feeling didn't go away. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone watching me, but the trail remained completely empty. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I checked it without breaking eye contact with the path ahead. No signal. That never happened out there. The coverage was usually fine. I slid it back inside my jacket and forced myself to keep walking, slower now, deliberate. The rest of the trail felt subtly warped, like I'd stepped into a place that looked the same but didn't behave the same. Sounds came a half-second late. My footsteps seemed quieter than normal. Even my breathing felt off. Another minute passed before I noticed it again, this time farther ahead through the trees. The shimmer had returned. Not in the same spot. It hovered slightly higher now, almost chest level, flickering faintly like air rippling in slow motion. It shifted barely side to side, as if adjusting its balance. I stopped again. The silence grew heavier. Behind the distortion, a vague shape seemed to lengthen and compress, but never clearly resolve. My stomach tightened. "What is this?" I whispered, more to myself than anything. The shimmer began to drift, gliding between branches without disturbing them. Not bending twigs, not brushing leaves, just floating along the path like it knew where it was going. Towards me. My feet automatically stepped backward. The air cooled slightly as it approached, enough for my skin to prickle. The pressure in my ears deepened, a dull sensation like descending in an elevator. 5 feet away. 3. Then it stopped. The closest it ever got. I couldn't see through it properly, just endless vague motion, as if something existed just out of reach of clarity. A low hum pulsed once, soft enough that I wasn't sure if I heard it or felt it more through the ground. Then the shimmer collapsed inward and vanished. No fades, no afterglow, just gone. The sound of the forest rushed back in like a snapped cord. Wind returned, leaves moved. I stood there shaking, fully aware how alone I was. For a second I considered running, but my legs felt stiff and unsure. Instead, I turned around and headed back the way I'd come, not daring to look over my shoulder more than once. The hike back took longer than usual, though my watch told me barely 10 minutes passed. When the first houses came into view again, the air finally felt normal. Heavier tension stayed in my body long after I reached my porch. That night, laying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, replaying it all again without any clear sense of what I'd experienced. Sometime after midnight, my phone finally regained signal. 3 missed messages from my sister, none during the time I'd been walking. The next morning, I drove back to the trail, partly hoping to find something physical, some evidence that it hadn't all been in my head. The path looked the same as always. Dry leaves, packed dirt, quiet woods, no shimmering space, no quiet dead zone, just regular forest. I walked only a short distance that time before the pressure returned faintly at the base of my neck. I turned around not long after and headed home. Weeks passed. Nothing happened again. Still, even now, anytime I walk that trail, I notice the same stretch where the air felt wrong, and my pace automatically slows as if my body remembers something my mind still can't figure out. And sometimes, just for a split second, the space between the trees looks like it's breathing. A soft glow pressed through the edges of my curtains, thin and pale, like someone had parked a car right outside and left the high beams on. I squinted at it, still half in that heavy, fuzzy sleep where everything feels slow. I checked my phone on the nightstand. It read 2:18 a.m., no notifications, no missed calls, just the time and the dull blue screen. The glow didn't pulse or move. It just stayed there, seeping in around the fabric in a way that felt wrong somehow. Too even, too quiet. I rolled onto my back and listened. No engines, no footsteps, no voices outside, just the low hum of my fridge through the wall and the faint ticking of the old heater. After a few seconds, curiosity won out over comfort. I pushed myself up and crept over to the window, bare feet cold against the floorboards. I slid the curtain aside slowly, expecting to see a car or maybe some weirdo shining a flashlight around the yard. Instead, I saw the pale glow lifting upward. It rose straight up past the top of the window frame, soundless, smooth, like a dim orb or dome drifting into the dark. No flicker, no trail. Just a quiet retreat into the cloudy sky until the night swallowed it. The backyard looked normal again. My fence, the patch of overgrown grass, the crooked old bird bath, no source for the light anywhere. I stood there, curtain still in my hand, staring out like I'd missed something important by a second. My name's Adrian Velez. I lived alone in a rented duplex just outside Port Angeles, close enough to hear the distant waves when the wind shifted right. It had been drizzling earlier that evening, the kind of light coastal rain that left everything damp and smelling slightly metallic already, but this felt different. I cracked the window open a few inches and leaned out. Cold air rolled in, salty and wet. No fresh light, no noise. Just darkness and the soft murmur of far-off surf. I waited. Nothing else happened. Eventually, I shut the window and pulled the curtains closed. I stood there a while longer, listening for an engine start or footsteps on wet gravel, but the night stayed still. Back in bed, sleep didn't come easy. Every tiny sound made my eyes snap open. The old floor creaking in the hallway, the pipes shifting as the heater kicked on and off. I kept glancing back at the curtains, half expecting that glow to seep through again. It didn't. When I finally drifted off, it was shallow and restless. The next morning was gray and foggy, the kind of fog that smeared the outline of everything and made distance hard to judge. I convinced myself maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Half dream, half reflection of passing headlights. That happens sometimes. But when I stepped out onto the back porch to take the trash out, I noticed the grass right beneath my bedroom window looked flattened in a neat circular patch. Not trampled, exactly, just gently bent, like something had pressed down evenly and then lifted away. I crouched, running my fingers over the damp blades. No footprints, no tire tracks, just that smooth, shallow depression in the grass. I shook it off and went about my day. By afternoon, I was back at my job on the docks, unloading shipments with my coworker Mateo, trying not to think about it. But all day I caught myself glancing up at the low clouds, scanning for anything out of place. Nothing appeared. That evening, I mentioned it casually to my neighbor Denise while we both checked our mail. "You ever see weird lights around here at night?" I asked, trying to sound normal. She laughed softly. "Only the usual drunk tourists and their flashlights." "Why?" "Just thought I saw something last night. Probably a reflection." She shrugged and shuffled back inside, not concerned at all. The next few nights passed quietly, enough to lull me even more into thinking it had been a fluke. But then, 3 days later, it happened again. This time, I wasn't asleep. I'd been lying on the couch watching a rerun with the volume low when the living room slowly filled with that same pale light. It crept across the carpet and up the walls like fog made of glow. I muted the TV and sat up straight. The glow wasn't harsh. It wasn't warm either, just steady and dim enough to notice. I approached the sliding glass door that looked out to the backyard. Outside, floating just above the fence line, a rounded haze of light hung completely still. No shape I could clearly define, but not just mist either. It held its form in an unnatural way, like it had edges that my eyes refused to focus on. My throat tightened. I stood there frozen, hand hovering over the door handle, unsure whether opening it was the worst decision or the only way to prove I wasn't losing it. The glow slid sideways, slow and deliberate, tracing along the top of the fence before drifting upward again into the fog, dissolving without a sound. The backyard returned to darkness. I looked at my phone again. 11:36 p.m. This time, the signal bars flickered and dropped to 0 before settling back. A chill crept along my arms. The air felt heavier for a moment, pressed flat and still. Even the distant ocean noise seemed to fade. I didn't open the door. I just stood there until my legs started shaking. That night, I double-checked every lock, every latch, every window. When I finally crawled into bed, I left the curtains slightly open, eyes fixed on the glass, replaying that silent upward drift over and over. Sometime after midnight, I heard a faint vibration through the floor, almost like a large truck passing, except there was no rumble to go with it. Just enough motion to make the water in the bedside glass ripple slightly. Then it stopped. No glow this time, no light, just subtle silence again. I stayed awake for hours, staring, listening, trying to piece together what kind of normal thing could cause all of this. Morning came slow and colorless. The fog clung to the edges of everything. I stepped outside again and noticed the same subtle flattening in the grass, extended farther this time, wider, almost like an impression from something round, but too light to leave actual marks. I felt embarrassed even thinking of it, but I still took a photo on my phone. When I checked the image later, the patch looked less defined than I remembered, just slightly darker grass. The following night, I didn't see the glow, but I smelled it instead. That cold metallic scent drifted faintly through my bedroom, sharp and clean, nothing like damp soil or ocean air. It lingered for a minute, then vanished as if someone had shut a door on it. I sat up, heart hammering, listening for movement outside. Nothing came. By the end of the week, I started wondering if the house itself felt different, like some part of my space was being observed quietly, without urgency, just a presence that arrived, hovered, and left. Then one night, it returned for the last time. I lay in bed with my eyes half closed when the pale glow pushed through the edges of my curtains again. Soft, steady, familiar in a way that made my pulse race. I slid the curtains open. The light hovered higher this time, just beyond the roofline, casting a faint sheen over the wet shingles and fence. Then slowly it lifted, as if responding to nothing but its own quiet timing, and drifted into the cloud cover above. The sky sealed behind it. The street stayed empty. No voices, no engines, just the distant hush of the ocean and the soft creak of my old house settling. I closed the curtains and stood there a long time, letting my eyes adjust back to darkness, trying to make any kind of sense of it all. Nothing else happened after that. No more pressing glow, no humming, no strange patches in the yard. But some nights, when the fog hung low and the curtains stirred slightly in the breeze, I still found myself staring at the window, waiting for that soft, shapeless light to quietly slide upward again. The air started feeling wrong about 10 minutes into the trail, like I'd walked into a pocket of wet pressure that hadn't been there a second earlier. It was late dusk, that weird in-between where the sky still held some faded orange, but the woods were already going dark. I slowed down, mostly because my chest felt tight, like I'd just climbed a steep hill even though the ground was flat. This was the Elkwood Trail north of Crestline, a quiet stretch most people only used on weekends. I'd come out after work because I needed to clear my head. My name's Marin Caldwell, and I'd lived near these woods long enough to know how they usually felt. This wasn't it. I stopped and listened. No birds, no distant road noise. Even the leaves had gone still. I remember thinking it felt like the whole forest had paused, like when a fridge suddenly stops humming and the silence hits you all at once. I kept walking anyway. Then I saw it. Just above the tree line against the dimming sky, something wide and dark slid into view. Not fast, not slow either. It didn't look like any aircraft I'd ever seen. It was round, but not perfectly. More like a flattened disc, dark enough that it swallowed the last bit of light behind it. I thought it was a low cloud at first. But clouds don't move like that. It drifted sideways, smooth and deliberate, no rotation, no flicker, just steady. I stood there frozen, heart picking up speed slowly instead of all at once. I'd seen planes from this trail before, helicopters sometimes. This was silent, no engine, no wind, just that heavy air and this shape blocking part of the sky like it didn't belong there. A little voice in my head kept trying to logic it away. Drone, reflection, some weird optical trick. But even as I thought that, the air seemed to thicken more, pressing against my ears until everything felt slightly muted. The disc hovered for maybe 10 seconds, long enough for my hands to go damp and my mouth to dry out. I noticed the tops of the trees under it weren't swaying, even though a moment ago there'd been a slight breeze. Then it started drifting again, moving away from me, deeper into the woods. It faded behind the hill slope and just vanished. When it was gone, the birds didn't come back. The forest didn't relax, the quiet stayed. I looked down at my phone, mostly to check the time, but the screen felt oddly dim even at full brightness. 7:42 p.m., I swore it had been just after 7 when I'd seen the shape. I stood there longer than I meant to, trying to get my breathing steady again. I finally forced myself to keep walking, but something felt off in a way I couldn't explain. The trail looked the same, dirt, packed hard, pine needles lining the edges, but I kept getting this sense of being watched. Not like eyes on me, more like awareness. Like something had registered I was there. A few minutes later, I heard a faint clicking sound above the canopy. Not mechanical exactly, but rhythmic, repeating every few seconds. I stopped again and tilted my head up, scanning for anything that could have made it. There was nothing. No birds, no visible shape, just that slow click, 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 and then sudden silence. I laughed once, nervous, mostly at myself. "Get it together," I muttered, even though no one could hear me. The trail curved ahead, and when I passed the bend, I realized the light had shifted more than it should have. The sky looked darker, almost like time had jumped forward. My phone now read 8:06. I hadn't been standing still that long. My stomach tightened again. I started walking faster, every sense sharpened. That heavy feeling in the air hadn't lifted, and the hairs on my arms stayed raised like something cold had brushed me, even though the evening was still warm. Halfway back toward the trailhead, I noticed a low humming sound. So faint, I almost missed it. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, like the ground itself was vibrating just beneath perception. I stopped and crouched, pressing my palm briefly against the dirt path. The faint vibration was real, subtle, but there. "Okay," I whispered, more to hear a voice than anything else. A few seconds later, far behind me, between the trees, a pale glow flickered once. Just a quick pulse, soft and colorless like moonlight on fog. When I spun around, it was gone. I made the decision then to leave. Not run, not sprint. I didn't want to feel like prey, but I definitely picked up the pace. As I walked, I kept glancing over my shoulder. Every rustle made my pulse jerk. More than once, I thought I saw movement through the branches that didn't line up with wind or shadow. Shapes that seemed just a little too smooth to be natural. By the time I reached the parking area, the sky had dimmed almost completely. The air pressure finally eased slightly, like whatever density had settled on the forest was loosening its grip. My car sat where I'd left it. Everything normal. Too normal. When I unlocked the door and got in, my phone vibrated with a missed call from my brother, Elias. The timestamp said 7:55. I checked the voicemail. "Hey, Mayor, you good? You called me and didn't say anything, just some weird static and breathing noise. Call me back." I stared at the screen. I hadn't called him. I hadn't even touched my phone during the walk except to check the time. My call log showed an outgoing call to Elias at 7:54 that lasted 30 seconds. I sat there for a long moment, engine still off, the quiet of the woods pressing in on all sides. On the drive home, I kept scanning the sky through the windshield. Everything looked empty. Just fading clouds and the last trace of daylight dissolving behind the mountains. At home, I showered and tried to shake it off, but the pressure feeling lingered faintly in my temples, like I'd spent too long at a high altitude. I checked my trail app out of habit. It showed my GPS path cutting off for about 12 minutes, right around where I'd seen the disc. After that, the line resumed closer to the trailhead, like I'd been moved forward without walking the in-between. Just before bed, I stood by the window and looked out toward the dark tree lines in the distance. The sky was clear, stars faint but visible. I half expected to see that shape again, hovering quietly, waiting. There was nothing, just normal night. Still, the quiet didn't feel the same as it used to. It no longer felt empty. The first one looked like a slow star that didn't belong where it was. I noticed it while sitting on the hood of my car, parked at the overlook above Crescent Bluff. It was just past midnight, warm and a little windy, the kind of night where you could still smell the dry grass even after dark. I'd come up there to clear my head after a rough shift. Nothing dramatic, just needed some quiet. My name's Marco Hensley. I lived a few minutes outside town in a rental off Route 18. This overlook sat on a rise that faced miles of low hills and farmland. I'd been up there plenty of times. Normally you'd see planes, satellites, the occasional slow drone from someone messing around. This wasn't any of those. The light moved sideways, stopped, then shifted diagonally. Clean, deliberate motions. It didn't blink. It didn't leave a trail. It just slid across the sky like it was tracing lines only it knew. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, watching closer. Then another light appeared to the left, same brightness, same distance. It moved in the opposite direction but matched the first one's pace perfectly. After a few seconds, both lights arced into a loose circle, then cut through the middle of it at right angles, geometric. That was the only way to describe it, like someone sketching shapes on invisible glass. I pulled my phone out, aiming the camera upward, but the screen barely picked up anything. Just dark with a faint blur where the light should have been. In real life, it was clear as day. A third light showed up above them, a little dimmer, and that's when I felt my stomach tighten. Not panic, not full fear, just that slow creeping feeling like something had noticed me without me understanding how. The air felt heavier, like the breeze had stalled. Even the usual night sounds from down the hill seemed muted. The three lights started moving together now, forming angles that made no sense on instinct, but still looked precise. One would move, the others followed, like they were locked into the same path, but offset slightly. I checked the time. 12:14 a.m. I kept watching, barely blinking. The shapes shifted from lines into something that looked almost like a rotating square, though the corners were never perfectly connected. It was like the idea of a square instead of the thing itself. My car radio clicked on by itself for half a second, just static. Then it shut off again. I turned my head toward the driver's seat, then back to the sky. The lights kept moving, slow and steady. No sound, no hum, just silent motion in patterns that made my eyes ache slightly after a while. A gust of wind ran up the hill suddenly, cool and sharp, lifting dust and dry leaves around my feet. The smell of dirt got stronger. I stood up, stretching my back, still staring upward. That's when one of the lights dropped lower. Not fast, just a controlled descent. It was still far away, but now it felt closer than anything should. The other two continued their pattern while the lower one drifted off to the side, almost like it was circling the outline of the hill. My phone screen dimmed, even though it was fully charged. I tapped it, waking it again. Everything looked normal. I glanced over my shoulder at the empty stretch of road behind me. No headlights, no movement. When I looked back up, the lights had shifted formation again. Now they were aligned in a shallow curve, rising and falling in slow rhythm, like something breathing. I felt stupid just standing there, but I couldn't move. My brain kept trying to attach logic to it. Military test. Atmospheric weirdness. Some drone tech I didn't know about, none of it fit. The lowest light paused mid-sky and pulsed once, very faint, just a slightly deeper glow for a second, not bright enough to light the ground, not enough to cast shadows. It reminded me of someone flicking a lighter behind frosted glass. My hands felt colder now. The night air pressed in around me, quiet and watchful. The trailing light slowly rose back up until all three were level again. They reformed the strange angled patterns, looping through invisible shapes that felt almost purposeful. Then, one by one, they started to dim. Not flicker, not vanish, just fade, as if distance itself was swallowing them. The sky behind them didn't change, no cloud cover, no haze thick enough to justify it. They simply grew less solid until they looked like thin pinpricks, then nothing. The night returned to normal. Wind moved again. Crickets picked up where they left off. I stood there another minute, looking at the empty sky, trying to convince myself it was done. The feeling didn't leave. I walked back around the car and sat inside, door still open, watching above the windshield. My heart beat faster than it should have, but not in a rush. More like it was bracing for something that didn't show. Another faint light appeared higher up, much dimmer than before. It didn't join any pattern. It just hovered there, perfectly still. Then it slid upward. Not towards space, not sideways, but like it was dissolving straight into the darkness above. It slowly thinned until it blended into the black sky like smoke pulled backward. I closed the car door and started the engine without thinking. The dashboard lit normally. No warnings. No glitches. Driving home, every hill felt too quiet. I kept glancing up through the windshield, half expecting to see those shapes again, hovering above the road, back, tracing silent grids over rooftops and power lines. Nothing followed me. When I pulled into my driveway, the porch light glowed the same dull yellow it always had. The house looked normal. Still, I waited a second before getting out. Inside, everything sounded ordinary. The fridge, the fan, the light buzz above the sink. I checked the time again. 12:47 a.m. It didn't feel like 30 minutes had passed. Through my bedroom window, the sky looked calm and empty. No strange motion, no glow. But every time I closed my eyes, I still pictured those impossible shapes moving in slow, careful patterns, like something was testing how the sky itself could bend before letting it quietly swallow the evidence. A low humming tone pulsed quietly through the open window beside my bed, soft enough that, at first, I thought it was the refrigerator downstairs or the old heater rattling awake. I'd left the window cracked because the air inside the cabin felt stale, even though the night outside was cool and damp. The sound didn't fade or change like normal background noise. It stayed steady, like a slow heartbeat from somewhere beyond the trees. I pushed myself up and glanced toward the shoreline. The ocean was barely visible, just a flat, dark stretch under a cloudy sky. The stars above looked off. Not brighter or dimmer, just slightly misaligned, like the pattern had been nudged out of place. I stared for a few seconds, expecting my eyes to adjust. They didn't. My name was Jonah Mercer, and I'd been staying at this rented coastal cabin for 2 nights, trying to clear my head after a long stretch of work. The place was quiet, isolated, and exactly what I needed, until that sound started moving through the air. I checked my phone. 1:42 a.m., no notifications, no missed calls. The hum deepened, not louder, just more present, like it filled the air rather than traveling through it. I swung my legs out of bed and padded across the wooden floor, bare feet brushing past cold knots in the planks. The sound felt closer by the time I reached the window. Outside, the trees along the edge of the property held perfectly still. No wind, no rustle. Even the waves seemed muted. I leaned forward and scanned the sky again. The stars didn't twinkle the way they usually did. A few of them looked slightly closer together, forming crooked lines that didn't match any constellation I recognized. It wasn't dramatic or obvious, just enough to not feel right. The humming shifted slightly, like it pulsed in waves. Slow, patient. I stepped outside onto the porch, the wood cool under my feet. The night air felt heavier than before, thick with salt and damp earth. I walked across the gravel path toward the edge of the clearing, eyes never leaving the sky. A faint glow started to bleed through the clouds, right above the tree line. It wasn't sharp or blinding, just a soft, pale light like moonlight diffused through fog, except the moon was nowhere in sight. The hum synced with it, each faint vibrational pulse matching the glow's slow rhythm. I stood there, arms hang uselessly at my sides, trying to convince myself it was just some weird reflection off the water or distant boat lights. But it didn't move like boats. It didn't flicker. It stayed locked in place. Then slowly the glow slid sideways, perfectly smooth. No sound, no trail, just a calm, deliberate drift. The stars above it shifted further out of alignment, like the sky itself adjusted around that one spot. A sharp unease crept into my chest. Not panic, just a heavy awareness that something wasn't behaving the way it should. The hum grew slightly stronger, enough that I felt it faintly through the soles of my feet. The ground didn't shake, just a mild vibration, like standing near a distant engine. I pulled my phone out again and raised it toward the light, half instinct, half confusion. The screen dimmed abruptly, and the signal dropped to 0. No bars, no data, just a blank carrier field. The glow pulsed once, faint but noticeable. The air felt colder suddenly, even though I hadn't moved. I stepped back without thinking, heels scraping against gravel. The hum didn't follow me. It stayed anchored to wherever that light hovered, as if it had claimed that space. Another minute passed, maybe several. Time felt stretched, loose. The glow shifted again, this time rising slightly above the trees, then freezing in place. The stars around it distorted subtly, lines bending in ways I couldn't quite focus on long enough to understand. I whispered something under my breath, more out of nerves than intention. The sound felt swallowed by the night. Behind me, the cabin door creaked faintly, as it caught a tiny movement in air I didn't feel. I turned my head briefly just to check the house, then looked back up. The glow had dimmed, shrinking slightly, but the hum intensified for a few seconds, vibrating through my jaw and ears. It wasn't painful, just intrusive. The sky cleared around it for a moment, and I could make out something darker within the glow. A smooth shape, no sharp edges, like a shadow against light that refused to resolve into anything familiar. The thought crossed my mind that I should go inside, lock the door, pretend I didn't see anything. I didn't move. The glow drifted again, higher this time, slowly approaching the thin clouds above. The hum began to thin, as if pulling away from the ground. The stars reconfigured slightly, snapping back closer to how they should have looked, but not quite perfect. I took a few cautious steps backward toward the porch. The glow suddenly steadied, holding still for several long seconds. Then, without sound or flare, it faded. Not abruptly. Just slowly draining out of the sky until there was nothing but dark and uneven star patterns. The hum lingered for a moment longer, faint and hollow, before dissolving into the quiet night. Silence returned in pieces. Distant wave crash, a bird settling somewhere in the trees, the faint flutter of leaves. I stood out there a few minutes longer, heart beating too fast for how still everything felt. When I finally went back inside and shut the door, the air didn't feel heavy anymore, just normal again. Dim. Uneventful. I checked my phone. Signal bars returned. The time read 2:01 a.m. I stared at the clock, realizing I could have sworn it had only been a few minutes since I'd looked last. The room felt colder than before. I climbed back into bed but couldn't fully relax. Every small sound made me tense. Every faint creak in the wood drew my attention toward the window again. The stars outside looked ordinary now, this familiar. But every so often, in the space just behind my thoughts, I kept sensing that quiet hum, like a memory echo. And I couldn't shake the feeling that the sky had briefly shifted and then carefully put itself back the way it found me. Condensation formed a perfect ring on my windshield while I was sitting in the grocery store parking lot, engine off, windows cracked just enough to let the late summer air drift in. It was still warm out, no sudden chill, no foggy breath, just this smooth, clear circle of moisture like someone had pressed a cold metal hoop against the glass. It caught my eye because it didn't look natural. Not streaked, not patchy, just a ring. My name was Darren Kovach, and I'd pulled over in the far corner of the lot to answer a call from my cousin Mateo. The sun was low and washed everything in dull orange light, the kind that made the asphalt look soft and dusty. There were a few cars going in and out, nothing strange about the place, except that ring. I rubbed at it with my sleeve. It didn't smear. It just faded and then crept back into shape, like the glass remembered it. I checked my dashboard temperature out of instinct. 78 degrees. Normal, same as when I'd parked. Mateo was still talking on the phone, rambling about his new job and some forklift accident at work. I half listened, eyes stuck on the windshield, watching the ring slowly sharpen again. No mist anywhere else, just that circle, centered slightly to the right of where my gaze would normally rest while driving. "You okay?" Mateo asked. "Yeah, just distracted," I said. "Weird windshield thing." He laughed and kept talking, but my stomach had tightened in that quiet way it does when something feels off, but you don't know why yet. Another car rolled past behind me, a pale blue Prius, sunlight reflecting cleanly off its side windows. No fog, no rings, just normal glass. My phone crackled and Mateo's voice cut out. The screen flashed, "Call failed." I looked up to reconnect and noticed the ring on the windshield had deepened, thicker now, with tiny lines branching inward like frost patterns, but without the cold. The air inside my car still felt warm and dry. I rolled my window down more, letting the outside heat rush in, just to see if anything shifted. Nothing changed. The ring stayed. I started the engine and pulled out of the lot, heading toward Route 6 like I'd planned. As the car moved, the ring moved with the glass, staying perfectly centered, almost like it wanted to be in front of me. No other cars had anything like it. At the stoplight, I leaned forward to study it closer. It had a slight shimmer, like condensation about to evaporate, but it never did. Around it, the rest of the windshield stayed perfectly clear. The light turned green. I drove on. It felt stupid to be unsettled by something as simple as fog, but this didn't behave like fog. It looked deliberate, measured, meant. Heading out of town, houses thinned into low fields and distant tree lines. The sky turned from orange to soft gray as the sun dipped lower. A faint layer of clouds rolled in from the west, nothing threatening, just heavy enough to dull the horizon. The ring pulsed once, barely noticeable, a subtle darkening and lightening. I blinked, convinced my eyes were tired. It stayed the same. A few miles down the highway, my phone buzzed with a text from Mateo. Call me back. I tapped the screen, but the signal bars dropped to zero. No service. That didn't make sense. This stretch of road always had coverage. I crested a slight hill and glanced ahead, half expecting something to cause all this. The road stretched empty, quiet, just me and fields on either side. Then I noticed another patch of condensation forming, faintly near the far edge of the windshield. Not a full circle, just a soft arc like the edge of another ring that never fully appeared. A low, distant hum drifted into the car. It wasn't coming from the engine or the road beneath me. It felt like pressure, more than sound, vibrating faintly through the steering wheel. I checked my mirrors. No cars behind me, no trucks. Just open road and fading light. The original ring thickened again, clearer now, and I realized it wasn't quite round. It was too precise, too smooth. My breathing felt shallow without me trying. The hum grew slightly stronger. Not loud, just present. I pulled over onto the narrow gravel shoulder, tires crunching softly as I stopped. The car idled, the hum didn't change. The ring sat there, calm, as if waiting. I opened the door and stepped out. The evening air hit me full force, warm and still. No breeze, no insects, just quiet. Standing beside the car, I expected the condensation to whiten or vanish, but it looked the same from the outside. A faint, perfect halo on the glass. Still no sign of fog anywhere else. I took a few hesitant steps around the front bumper, scanning the windshield from different angles. Sunlight barely kissed the horizon behind me, throwing long shadows across the field. And then I noticed something odd. The ring didn't reflect the sky the same way the rest of the glass did. Through that circle, the sky looked slightly darker, like it filtered light instead of reflecting it. The hum deepened, subtle, slow, like the low note of something massive moving far away. I checked the field ahead, searching for any source. Nothing moved. No power lines nearby, no towers. The condensation around the ring began to creep outward just a little, thin veins forming like frost about to spread. But the temperature hadn't changed. My breath didn't show. My arms didn't feel cold. I stepped back, suddenly uncomfortable being so close to it. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. Still no signal. Time read 7:12 p.m. I glanced back up at the windshield. The ring had shifted. Not dramatically, but enough to know it was no longer centered where it had been before. It had slid slightly upward, as if following my line of sight. My skin prickled. The hum grew fainter, thinning like sound drifting away. And then something else caught my attention. A faint glow just above the horizon, far out past the fields. Soft, pale, almost like a reflection of the dying sun, except the sun was behind me now. The glow didn't flicker. It didn't break into pieces. It just hovered low, steady and quiet. The ring responded. It tightened, edges sharpening, condensation drawing itself into a clearer outline. The veins receded, leaving only the circle again, more defined than before. I stood there, frozen, watching the distant glow hold perfectly still while the sky slowly dimmed around it. Another soft vibration rippled through the ground beneath my boots. No birds, no wind. I forced myself back into the driver's seat and shut the door. The inside of the car felt heavier now, like the air had thickened. I stared through the ring at the glow on the horizon. The two lined up unnervingly well, as if the ring framed it. Several seconds passed, maybe longer. My sense of time felt slow and stretched. Then the glow shifted sideways, smooth and silent. The ring followed, not sliding across the glass like liquid, but reforming in that new position, as though it had always been meant to sit there. The hum returned, softer but steady. I gripped the steering wheel and swallowed hard, pulse loud in my ears. Fear didn't rush me all at once. It crept in heavy and slow, filling the space behind my ribs. The glow drifted farther left. The ring adjusted again. I finally started the car and pulled back onto the road, heart thudding. As I drove, the glow kept the same distance, never getting closer or farther, just pacing me along the horizon. The ring remained steady in front of my eyes, like a sighting target I couldn't escape. Mile after mile passed in swallowed silence. No radio, no service. Just the road and that quiet light. After what felt like forever, the glow diminished slightly, then again, until it thinned into barely visible haze. The ring on the windshield softened and finally dissolved as well, vanishing without streaks or residue. The hum faded with it. I slowed the car, breathing harder than I realized, watching the last hint of light melt into the darkening sky. Nothing replaced it. No sudden normal noise, just distant crickets returning and the soft rush of tires on asphalt. By the time I reached the edge of town again, my phone signal returned like nothing had happened. A missed call from Mateo. A few regular notifications. The windshield stayed clear the rest of the drive. But every time the glass caught the last traces of sunlight just right, I could almost swear I saw the faint outline of a circle trying to reappear, as if the surface remembered something it wasn't supposed to hold. The radio faded from an old country station into soft static without me touching anything. I glanced down at the dial, thinking maybe I'd bumped it, but both my hands were still on the steering wheel. Outside the windshield, a dull glow hovered at the very end of the gravel road, about where the tree line started. It wasn't bright, just enough to notice against the dark. I was parked up on the overlook outside Marine Falls, the one people used when they didn't feel like hiking all the way down to the water. It was late, probably close to 10, and the air had that damp, salty feel that came off the ocean. A thin layer of fog hung low over everything, but the sky above was clear enough to see a few stars. My friend Caleb had canceled on a late-night drive, so I'd gone alone just to clear my head. The glow didn't move yet. It just floated there, steady and quiet, like it had always been part of the road. I turned the engine off to see if the radio would reset, and the static kept going for another 2 seconds before cutting out completely. The sudden quiet felt heavy. I rolled my window down a crack and waited to hear the usual night sounds. Bugs, distant traffic, the ocean far off, but everything sounded muted, like someone had lowered the volume on the world. The light pulsed once, faintly. Not flickering, more like a slow inhale and exhale. I told myself it was probably someone's headlights angled weird through the fog. That stretch of road got almost no traffic, but it wasn't impossible. I leaned forward to see if I could spot any shape behind the glow, but there was nothing. Just woods and that single dim point. Then my phone buzzed and scared the hell out of me. It was a text from my neighbor Gina asking if I'd picked up my mail again. I looked at my signal and noticed it had dropped to 1 bar, which was strange for this spot. Usually it was full out here. I typed back that I'd grab it tomorrow, hit send, and watched the message hang there for a solid 10 seconds before finally going through. When I looked back up, the glow had shifted slightly to the right, not rising or falling, just sliding sideways, like it was following the line of the road. I eased my foot back onto the brake and turned the key to start the car. The engine hesitated before finally kicking over. The dashboard lights came on dimmer than usual. I waited another minute, just staring, trying to convince myself I was overthinking it. The glow slid a little more and then stopped again. A soft hum started, barely audible. Not from the car. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. The kind of sound you'd feel more than hear, like a vibration pressing gently against your ears. I checked my mirrors. No cars, no people, no movement. Just me and that light. I pulled forward slowly, tires crunching on the gravel. The glow stayed the same distance away, like it was tied to my car with an invisible string. 10 feet forward, it moved 10 feet too. I stopped. It stopped. My pulse picked up, and the air inside the car felt suddenly too warm. I rolled the window further down and called out, half joking, half nervous. "Hello?" My voice sounded small. It didn't echo. The forest line at the end of the road looked darker than it should have, as if the light wasn't really touching anything around it. The hum thickened for a moment, then dropped just as quickly, leaving my ears ringing softly. My headlights flicked once, like someone tapped the switch, but my hands never moved. I felt that cold, creeping feeling in the pit of my stomach, the one you get when you realize a situation is shifting out of normal territory. I decided I didn't need to be brave. I reversed carefully, eyes locked on that glow. As the car rolled back, the light drifted with me, still keeping its distance. The fog around it started to thin, but the glow didn't get brighter. It stayed dull and smooth, almost flat. Another strange thing happened. My clock on the dashboard changed from 10:14 to 10:16 in a blink, skipping a minute. I hadn't even been out there long enough to notice time passing. The radio snapped back on for a second. A low burst of static followed by a faint voice that didn't sound like music or a DJ, just a clipped mumble, too distorted to make out. then silence again. I backed all the way until I was nearly at the main road. The glow finally stopped moving and hovered where the gravel met the trees. It stayed there, motionless, like it had finished whatever it was doing. I put the car in park and sat there breathing slowly, trying to calm the trembling in my hands. The hum had softened but never fully faded. I watched for another minute, then another. The glow dimmed just a little, then suddenly slid upward and vanished into the fog without any trailing light or sound. The night felt wrong after that. Too quiet, too empty. I waited a few more moments before pulling out onto the main road. As I drove home, the radio behaved normally, playing some late-night talk show, but I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, expecting to see that dim light floating behind me again. The rest of the drive passed in a haze. Streetlights flickered as I came back into town, and I noticed a few porch lights turning on and off randomly, but I didn't know if that meant anything or if my brain was just trying to connect dots. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a long time before getting out. The air felt heavy again, like before a storm, but the sky was still clear. Inside, everything looked normal. My dog barely lifted his head when I walked in, which was strange on its own. Later, lying in bed, I replayed the whole thing over and over. The static, the way the light kept pace, the skipped minute. I checked my phone again before sleeping. My sent text to Gina showed the timestamp as 10:15 p.m., even though I swore I sent it closer to when I first pulled up. I never saw the glow again. But sometimes when I drive past that overlook now, my radio softens for just a second, like it's about to slip back into static, and I feel that same tight pressure in the air, like something is paying attention just beyond the edge of view. The radio snapped to static so sharply that I jumped in my seat. I'd been sitting in the far corner of the Valley Grow lot, engine idling, watching the grocery store's sliding doors open and close while I waited for my sister to text back. It was early evening, that bluish-gray time right before full dark, and a thin layer of snow covered the pavement, reflecting the tired yellow glow of the overhead lights. Somewhere off behind the strip mall, the mountains sat like dark shapes against the low clouds. One second my station was playing a soft country song. The next it was just harsh white noise. I reached for the dial, assuming the signal cut out again. That happens sometimes out here, but before I could touch anything, the static dropped into a low humming tone. Not music, not a signal. Just a steady sound, almost too smooth to be mechanical. At the same time, a pale light swept across the windshield. It wasn't the glare of someone else's headlights. It moved from the front of the car up over the roofline like something passed directly above me. Slow, controlled. Then it faded into the low clouds without any clear source. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I leaned forward and looked through the windshield, scanning the sky. All I could see were thick gray clouds hanging low, pressing down on the landscape. The humming tone continued through the speakers, steady and faint, like someone had tuned into a frequency that didn't exist. I twisted the volume knob down. It didn't change. I turned the radio off entirely. The hum remained. That made my stomach drop a little. Okay, I muttered to the empty car. I tried again, clicking the radio button on and off, still there. The same low tone filled the cabin like it didn't care what I wanted. Outside, the lot stayed normal. A pickup rolled past slowly, tires crunching over thin snow. A guy pushed a cart toward his trunk. Nobody looked up. The pale light didn't return. I sat there waiting for something else to happen, unsure what exactly I expected. The hum softened slightly but never disappeared. After about a minute, it faded back into static, then snapped back to my usual station like nothing had happened. The song resumed mid-verse. I stared at the dashboard longer than necessary, then glanced up again at the sky. Just clouds, just dull winter night settling in. When my phone buzzed, I flinched harder than made sense. It was Celeste, my sister, telling me she'd gotten held up at work and would be another 20 minutes. I texted back that I was still parked and fine, even though fine felt like the wrong word. I shifted in my seat, trying to shake off the weird prickling on my arms. The car heater hummed softly. The normal world crept back in bit by bit. Then the light passed overhead again. Softer this time, more spread out, like a wide glow sliding across the low clouds rather than a sharp beam. It moved steadily, covering the length of my windshield in a few seconds, then disappeared into the sky above the grocery store roof. My radio cut out again. Static. Then that same low hum threaded back through the speakers, deeper now, more present. A pressure settled around the car, not heavy, just noticeable, like the air had tightened around me. I leaned my head back and looked straight up through the windshield. The clouds looked thicker than before, but there was a faint brightness bleeding through one section, diffused and formless. The hum synced strangely with my breathing, not matching it, but feeling aware of it. I swallowed slowly. Is someone screwing with me? I muttered again, half hoping someone nearby would suddenly laugh. No one did. A cold sensation crept into the cabin even though the heater was blowing warm air. The inside windows began to fog.